My parents announced at their wedding anniversary dinner. "We are going to Hawaii next week with the entire family for another party." Everybody was happy. Then I asked them, "What time is the departure?" Dad replied, "You do not know because you are not a part of us. You can stay behind and take care of all the kids." What I did next, no one could believe. My name is Sophia, and I am 32 years old. For the last decade, I have been the invisible wallet that funded my family lifestyle. My father James and my mother Beatrice always had a taste for the finer things in Atlanta, but never the bank account to match it. I am a forensic accountant, which means I spend my days tracking down hidden assets and exposing financial fraud. You would think with a job like mine, I would have spotted the fraud, living in my own childhood home sooner. But like they say, love is blind, or in my case, loyalty was a blindfold. Before I continue this story of how I left my family with an $18,000 dinner bill, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever been the one doing all the giving while everyone else did the taking. The night everything fell apart. Started at Chop's Lobster Bar, one of the most expensive steakhouses in Buckhead, Atlanta. We were there to celebrate my parents' 40th wedding anniversary. The table was covered in seafood towers, $300 bottles of Cabernet, and enough Wagyu beef to feed a small army. My younger sister Ebony sat across from me taking endless selfies with her husband Kyle. Ebony is 28 and has never worked a full 40-hour week in her life. She calls herself a lifestyle influencer, which really just means she spends my parents' money to look rich on Instagram. And then there is Kyle, my brother-in-law. He is a mediocre real estate agent who has not sold a house in 2 years, but walks around with the arrogance of a Wall Street tycoon. I sat there sipping my sparkling water, watching them ordering dessert. My mother, Beatrice, tapped her glass with a silver spoon to get everyone attention. Her diamond bracelet, which I paid for, off caught the light. She beamed at the table and said, "James and I have a wonderful surprise. Since this anniversary is such a milestone, we have decided to extend the celebration. We are taking the whole family to the Four Seasons in Maui next week for 7 days of relaxation." The table erupted in cheers. Ebony shrieked and clapped her hands. Kyle leaned back in his chair and high-fived my father. I smiled genuinely, feeling a wave of relief. I had been working 80-hour weeks for months, and a break in Hawaii sounded like heaven. I pulled out my calendar on my phone and asked, "That sounds amazing. Mom, what date do we fly out so I can set my out-of-office reply?" The table went deadly silent. My mother looked down at her plate, avoiding my eyes. My father, James, cleared his throat and took a long sip of wine. He looked at me with a cold indifference that sent a chill down my spine. "You are not flying out anywhere, Sophia. You are staying here in Atlanta." I blinked, confused. I asked, "What do you mean?" "The family is going, isn't it?" My father shook his head. "You are not part of the vacation party. We need someone to stay behind and watch Ebony and Kyle, 3 children. And the house needs looking after. The pool, maintenance guys are coming next week, and someone needs to supervise them. Since you are not going, we figured you could stay at our place and handle the domestic duties." I felt the blood drain from my face. I looked at Ebony, waiting for her to defend me, to say that it was crazy to treat her sister like a nanny. But she just smirked and took a bite of her lava cake. She said, "Come on, Sophia, it makes the most sense. You are so good with the kids. And it is not like you have anything else going on. You are always just working anyway." Then Kyle chimed in with that condescending tone he always uses when he speaks to me. He laughed and said, "Yeah, Sophia, think of it as a staycation. You are single. You have no husband and no social life. You are practically built for labor. Let the people who actually know how to enjoy life go to Hawaii. You can pretend the pool in the backyard is the ocean." The disrespect hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. I looked around the table at the people I had supported for 10 years. I paid off the mortgage on my parents' house. I paid for Ebony wedding. I leased the Mercedes. Kyle was currently driving valeted outside, and here they were treating me like hired help. telling me I was not worthy of a vacation, I was only worthy of serving them. Something inside me snapped. It was not a loud explosion. It was a quiet click, like a vault door locking shut. My forensic accountant brain took over. I stopped seeing them as family. I saw them as liabilities, bad investments that needed to be liquidated immediately. I looked at the bill folder sitting at the edge of the table. The waiter had placed it there earlier, expecting the usual routine. I would quietly slip my black card inside and pay for everything, while my father pretended to reach for his wallet. I knew the total. Inside that folder was astronomical. We had ordered the most expensive items on the menu, including 2 bottles of vintage wine that cost $4,000 each. I smiled, a cold, calm smile that didn't reach my eyes. I picked up my purse and stood up. My mother looked up, startled. "Where are you going, Sophia? We haven't even had the toast yet." I looked down at her and said, "I just remembered I do have a life, Kyle, and I have things to do. Enjoy Hawaii. Although I suspect the weather is going to be very stormy for you here in Atlanta." Kyle rolled his eyes. "Sit down. Do not be dramatic, just because you are jealous." I ignored him. I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app. Under the table where they could not see, I tapped on the card management section for my American Express Centurion card, the one authorized user card that my father carried in his wallet and the primary card I usually used for these dinners. I selected the option, Report Lost or Stolen. The app asked me to confirm that this would immediately deactivate all cards associated with the account and decline any pending transactions. I hit Confirm. I looked at my father and said, "Happy anniversary, Dad. I hope the memory of this dinner is worth $18,000, because that is exactly what it costs." I turned and walked away toward the exit. My heart was pounding, but my steps were steady. I did not look back, but I could hear the confusion starting behind me. I walked past the host stand and out into the cool night air, giving the valet my ticket. As I waited for my car, I watched through the large glass window of the restaurant. The waiter had arrived at the table to collect the payment. My father laughed, waving his hand dismissively, and handed over the black card, the card I had just deactivated. I saw the waiter walk to the terminal. I saw him swipe it, then frown. He swiped it again. He wiped the strip and inserted the chip. I watched my father's face turn from smug satisfaction to confusion. The waiter walked back to the table and said something. My father stood up, gesturing angrily. He pulled out another card, my mother emergency card, which was also linked to my account. Declined. Kyle stood up, puffing his chest out, probably shouting, "Do you know who we are?" But the manager was already walking over, flanked by 2 security guards. The manager was not smiling. He was pointing at the bill and then pointing at the door. My car pulled up. I tipped the valet $100 and slid into the leather seat. As I drove away, I saw blue lights reflecting in my rearview mirror. A police cruiser was pulling into the restaurant parking lot. My phone started buzzing on the passenger seat. Dad calling, Mom calling, Kyle calling, Ebony calling. I reached over and pressed the power button, silencing them all. They wanted me to manage the house while they were in Hawaii. Well, I had just started by cleaning up the finances. Step 1 was cutting off the parasites. The drive home was the most peaceful commute of my life, but I knew this was just the beginning of the war. The elevator doors to my penthouse opened with a soft chime, and I stepped into the sanctuary of my living room. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the Atlanta skyline, glittering like a sea of diamonds against the dark, velvet sky. It was quiet here, peaceful. The air smelled of expensive sandalwood and silence. The complete opposite of the chaos I had just left behind at the steakhouse, I tossed my clutch onto the white marble kitchen island and poured myself a glass of Pinot Noir. My hand was steady, my heartbeat was slow and rhythmic, logical and precise. There were no tears. There was no shaking. This was not a breakdown. This was a correction. My phone, which I had tossed onto the sofa cushion, began to vibrate violently again. It had been buzzing non-stop since I drove out of the restaurant parking lot. The screen lit up with the name Dad, followed by Mother, then Ebony, and finally Kyle. Calling for the 10th time, I sat down and placed the phone on the coffee table, staring at it like it was a biological specimen in a petri dish. I swiped to answer, but put it on speaker without saying a word. Sophia, are you insane? My father's voice boomed through the quiet apartment, almost distorting with rage. Do you have any idea how humiliating that was? The manager threatened to call the police on us. We had to leave my vintage Omega watch as collateral, just to leave the building. You need to turn this car around. Come back here, pay this bill, and apologize to your mother right now. She is having heart palpitations. I took a sip of wine, swirling the dark red liquid in the glass. I am waiting for an answer. Sophia, my father shouted. I leaned forward and spoke softly, calmly. No, Dad. You are not waiting for an answer. You are waiting for a bailout, and that department is permanently closed. I hung up before he could respond, immediately blocking the number. Then I picked up my laptop. It was a sleek silver machine, the tool of my trade as a forensic accountant. Usually I used it to hunt down embezzlers and money launderers. Tonight I was using it to surgically remove the tumors from my own financial life. I logged into my primary banking dashboard, the screen filled with pie charts and transaction lists. It was a map of my own exploitation. For 10 years I had convinced myself that paying for everything was my duty, that if I bought their love expensive enough, eventually it would become real. But looking at the $18,000 attempted charge from dinner tonight, I realized I was not buying love. I was paying a ransom. I started with the telecommunications account. We were on a family plan that I had set up 5 years ago, giving them unlimited data, international calling, and the newest iPhone upgrades. Every September, the bill was $480 a month, automatically deducted from my checking account. I clicked on Manage Lines. There they were, James, Beatrice, Ebony, and Kyle. I selected all 4 checkboxes. The system asked for a reason for cancellation. I typed in non-payment by users and hit confirm effective immediately at midnight. Their phones would turn into glorified paperweights. No more data, no more calls, no more Instagram uploads for Ebony, no more angry voicemails for me. Next was the car insurance. This was the one that gave me a dark sense of satisfaction. Kyle drove a Mercedes G-Wagon that he insisted was necessary for his image as a real estate mogul. The truth was, he could not get insurance on his own because of 2 DUIs and a credit score lower than his IQ. I had added him to my policy to keep him legal on the road. Mostly because my sister begged me, saying he needed the car to drive my nieces and nephews. I pulled up the policy details. The premium was astronomical because of his risk factor. I clicked, Remove Driver A. Warning box popped up stating that removing the primary driver would notify the leasing company that the vehicle was uninsured, which would trigger a default on the lease agreement. I did not hesitate. Click. The policy was canceled. A notification email was instantly sent to the leasing agency. By tomorrow morning, the repo men would be getting a work order for that black Mercedes. I took another sip of wine. Feeling lighter with every click, it was like shedding dead weight. Then I moved to the credit cards. Ebony had a supplementary Platinum Amex linked to my account. She used it for groceries, she claimed. But the statement showed charges at Sephora, Nordstrom, and a very expensive holistic spa in Buckhead just yesterday. I looked at the pending charges. She was currently at a bar, probably buying rounds of drinks to complain about me to her friends. I selected her card, freeze card. Then, for good measure, I selected report lost or stolen, just to ensure the physical card would be flagged if she tried to swipe it again. I could imagine the scene. The bartender coming back with that pitying look, telling her the card was declined in front of her high society friends. Finally, I went for the infrastructure, my parents' house. The sprawling 4-bedroom villa that they lived in was legally owned by my LLC, But all the utility bills were in my personal name because my father had a dispute with the power company years ago and refused to pay a deposit. I paid the electricity, the water, the gas, and the high-speed fiber optic internet. I logged into the Georgia Power portal. The bill for last month was $600. They liked to keep the air conditioning at 60 degrees, even in the summer, and left every light in the house on to make it look occupied and grand. I navigated to the service request section. I selected disconnect service. The calendar popped up asking for a date. I selected tomorrow morning. The system asked for a forwarding address for the final bill. I typed in the address of the homeless shelter downtown. A petty move, perhaps. But after being told I was not part of the family, I figured I should not be part of their lighting grid either. I sat back and watched the screen confirm the requests. One by one, the digital tethers that bound me to them were being severed. It was surgical. It was clean. It was devastating. My phone on the table lit up again. But this time it was not a call. It was a text notification from the bank. Not my bank. Their bank. Since I managed their finances, I still had the alert set up on my phone for overdrafts. Ping account. Ending in 4509. Insufficient funds. Ping account. Ending in 4509. Transaction declined. Uber Eats. Ping alert. Insurance policy. Cancelled. Mercedes-Benz. Financial services. It was starting. The digital fireworks. I could visualize the scene on the other side of town. They were likely huddled in the living room of the villa, trying to figure out how to get home, or how to order food since they had no cash left after the watch incident. Suddenly their phones would stop refreshing their feeds. The lights in the house were still on for now, but the darkness was coming. Kyle's phone buzzed on the table in my imagination. He probably looked down, seeing the email from the insurance company, asking why his coverage had been dropped. He would start swearing, face turning red, realizing that without insurance, he could not legally drive the car to the airport for their Hawaii trip. Ebony was likely trying to buy a comfort purchase online, maybe a new dress for the vacation, and getting the payment failed red text. She would try again and again, getting more frantic, thinking it was a glitch until she realized the well had run dry. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city lights. The guilt I expected to feel was absent. Instead, there was only a cold clarity. They had told me I was good for nothing but labor and looking after their assets. Well, I was looking after the assets now. I was protecting them from parasites. I picked up my phone and saw a text from Kyle popping up on the lock screen before the service cut off completely. It read, "You think this is funny? You are ruining our lives. When I see you, I am going to make you pay for this." I laughed softly into the empty room. "Make me pay, Kyle. You haven't paid for a single thing in 5 years." I turned off my phone completely, tossing it onto the sofa. I walked into my bedroom and pulled out my suitcase. Not to pack for Hawaii, but to prepare for the war that was coming tomorrow. Morning would bring the physical confrontation. They would come here screaming and demanding, sending flying monkeys to guilt-trip me. But tonight, I would sleep the sleep of the just, knowing that for the first time in my life, I was not the one paying the price for their happiness. I climbed into my bed, the Egyptian cotton sheets feeling cool against my skin. I closed my eyes, visualizing the power company truck rolling up to their driveway at 8 in the morning, ready to pull the meter. I visualized the tow truck circling the block looking for Kyle Mercedes. I visualized Ebony trying to call customer service and getting a recorded message saying her number was no longer in service. It was cruel. Yes. But it was also the first time I had ever respected myself. The Bank of Sophia was closed, and the foreclosure on their fantasy life had just begun. Tomorrow the real eviction would start, and I needed to be rested for the show. The morning sun rose over Atlanta, bringing with it the oppressive humidity that turns the city into a steam bath by noon. Usually inside my parents' sprawling Mediterranean-style villa, the climate was controlled to a crisp 68 degrees, regardless of the weather outside. But this morning was different. The hum of the industrial air conditioning unit was gone. The gentle whir of the refrigerator fan was silent. the house sat in a heavy, dead quiet that was about to be broken by panic. I was not there to see it in person, but I knew exactly how the scene played out because I had access to the smart home security cameras, which operated on a backup battery system. I sat in my kitchen sipping a fresh cup of coffee, watching the feed on my iPad, like it was the morning news. At 8 in the morning, the temperature inside their house had already crept up to 75 degrees. I watched my sister Ebony stumble into the kitchen, wearing a silk robe that cost more than my first car. She tapped the screen of her phone furiously, pushing her perfectly manicured nails against the glass. Then she walked over to the smart fridge, expecting the screen to light up with the weather and her schedule. It remained black. She pulled the handle and frowned. The light inside did not turn on. I watched her lips move, shouting for Mom. She opened the freezer drawer and I smiled, knowing that $300 worth of organic grass-fed steaks and gourmet ice cream were slowly beginning to weep onto the floor, melting into a puddle of expensive waste. Then came the real crisis Ebony held, her phone up, walking in circles around the kitchen island trying to find a signal. She was trying to post her morning affirmation story to Instagram, something she did religiously to show her followers how perfect her life was. But the Wi-Fi was dead. And thanks to my late-night purge of the family plan, her cellular data was non-existent. She was digitally stranded, cast away on an island of silence. For a girl whose entire existence relied on external validation, being offline was not just an inconvenience, it was an existential threat. In the driveway, the situation was escalating from inconvenient to catastrophic. My brother-in-law Kyle walked out the front door wearing designer sweatpants and holding a car key fob. He pointed it at his beloved Mercedes G-Wagon and pressed the unlock button. Nothing happened. He pressed it again, walking closer, furious. He did not know that when I canceled the insurance, I also notified the leasing company of a breach of contract regarding the primary garaging, address and payment default. A flatbed tow truck was already backing up the long driveway. The beep 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 of the truck reversing cut through the morning air. Kyle ran down the steps, waving his arms, screaming at the driver. I could not hear the audio clearly through the camera, but his body language was unmistakable. He was doing the "do you know who I am?" routine, chest puffed out, finger pointing aggressively. The driver, a large man who had likely dealt with 1,000 Kyles in his lifetime, simply ignored him. He hooked the G-Wagon up by the wheels, watching Kyle scream, with a look of utter boredom. Within 5 minutes, the symbol of Kyle's status, the vehicle he used to look down on everyone else, was hoisted into the air and driven away, leaving nothing but a grease stain on the paver driveway, and a man standing in his socks, looking smaller than he ever had. Before I closed the iPad and took a deep breath, the first wave of the attack was successful. The chaos I had orchestrated was unfolding with mathematical precision. But I knew my mother Beatrice would not take this lying down. She was not the type to sit in the heat and reflect on her actions. She was a woman who believed in weaponizing guilt and public spectacle. An hour later, my doorbell camera alerted me to movement at my front gate. I lived in an upscale townhouse community, one with manicured lawns and nosy neighbors who loved nothing more than a little morning drama. I checked the monitor. My mother had arrived. She must have taken an Uber since my father. Luxury sedan was likely low on gas, and they had no credit cards to fill it up. She was wearing a tweed suit that was a very convincing knockoff of a Chanel design, pastel pink with gold buttons meant to signal elegance and maternal warmth. She marched up to my front door and began to pound on it with her fist. "Sophia, open this door right now," came her muffled voice through the thick wood. I stood on the other side, leaning against the wall, calm and silent. I had no intention of opening it. When I did not answer, she stepped back and looked up at the bedroom windows. She took a deep breath and began the performance. Beatrice Jenkins was an actress who had missed her calling. She threw her hands up in the air, and her voice pitched up an octave loud enough for the neighbors 3 doors down to hear Sophia. "How can you do this to your own mother? After everything we sacrificed for you. We are starving, Sophia. Your father is sick, and you cut off the power. You are trying to kill us. I peeked through the blinds. I saw Mrs. Gable from across the street, stepping out onto her porch, pretending to sweep, but clearly watching eagerly. Another neighbor was walking his dog and had stopped completely holding his phone up, probably recording. My mother saw them too, and it only fueled her performance. She fell to her knees right there on my front lawn, clutching her chest. She was sobbing now, loud, theatrical sobs that shook her shoulders. "Look at what she does to me," she wailed to the invisible audience. My own daughter. I carried her for 9 months, and she leaves us to rot. She is ungrateful. She is cruel. My phone started buzzing again. It was a text from Mrs. Gable. "Sophia, is everything okay? Your mother seems very distressed. Maybe you should go out there." I looked at the text, then back at my mother. She was now lying prone on the grass, ruining the knees of her pink suit, pounding the earth. The humidity was rising, and I could see the sweat making her makeup run. She looked deranged, desperate and dangerous. Not physically dangerous, but dangerous to my reputation, dangerous to my peace. I walked over to the smart home control panel on my wall. My finger hovered over the security section. I could call the police. I could have her removed for trespassing, but that would give her the martyrdom she craved. She would tell the police I was abusive, that she was just a worried mother checking on her child. No. I needed a solution that was non-lethal but incredibly effective, a solution that would wash away the drama. I navigated to the irrigation control tab. My lawn had a high-pressure sprinkler system designed to keep the fescue grass emerald green in the Georgia heat. It was scheduled to run at 4 in the morning, but I had the manual override right at my fingertips. I looked out the window one last time. My mother was mid-wail, screaming about how I had stolen her retirement money, a lie so bold it almost made me laugh. I pressed the button labeled Zone A Front Lawn Max Pressure. There was a sudden hiss, followed by the rhythmic thwack 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 of the impact sprinklers rising from the grass. 6 industrial-grade heads popped up simultaneously, surrounding the spot where my mother was kneeling. The water hit her with the force of a heavy rainstorm. It was not a gentle mist. It was a deluge. Within seconds, the pink tweed suit was soaked through, becoming heavy and dark. The perfectly coiffed hair, which she spent $80 a week maintaining at the salon, plastered to her skull. The water hit her face mid-scream, filling her mouth and silencing the lies. She shrieked, scrambling to get up, slipping on the wet grass. Her dignity dissolved instantly. She was no longer the tragic victim. She was a wet rat in a pink suit, flailing in a mud puddle. The neighbors who had been watching with concern were now covering their mouths, trying to hide their laughter. I watched her stumble backward, blinded by the water, trying to shield her face with her expensive handbag. She ran toward the street, her heels sinking into the softening earth, tripping and recovering until she reached the pavement. She looked back at my house, mascara running down her cheeks, looking like a character from a horror movie. I tapped the button again, turning the system off. The sprinklers retreated into the ground, leaving only the silence and the smell of wet earth. My phone buzzed. It was Mrs. Gable again. The text simply read, "Nice. Aim." I walked back to the kitchen and poured the rest of my coffee down the sink. The performance was over. My mother had wanted a reaction, she got hydration. Now that the emotional appeal had failed, I knew what was coming next. They would stop trying to shame me and start trying to sue me. The legal threats were inevitable, but unlike them, I had receipts for everything. I sat down at my desk and opened a new folder on my laptop, labeling it. Evidence Phase 1 was complete. The silence in my house felt different now. It was not just quiet. It was fortified, and I was ready for the next siege. I drove to work with the focus of a surgeon preparing for an operation. My office was located in the heart of the financial district, inside a glass and steel tower that scraped the clouds. Sterling and Vance was one of the most prestigious forensic accounting firms in the Southeast. We did not just balance books. We hunted down financial predators. The lobby was a cathedral of marble and intimidation, designed to make anyone who entered feel small unless they belonged there, and for the last 7 years I belonged there. I walked through the security turnstiles, nodding to the guards who knew me by name. I took the express elevator to the 42nd floor. The silence of the ascent gave me time to center myself. I knew my family would not stay quiet for long. The water sprinkler incident was a tactical victory, but the war was far from over. I just did not expect the next battle to happen on my home turf so soon. It was 11 in the morning when the peace of the office was shattered. I was in my corner office reviewing the assets of a shell corporation when my intercom buzzed. It was Jasmine, the receptionist at the front desk. Usually unflappable, but today her voice was tight with tension. Sophia, there are 2 men here to see you. They are causing a disturbance. One of them is shouting demands and refusing to leave. Security is on the way, but he keeps saying he is your family. I sighed, closing my laptop. I knew exactly who it was. I told Jasmine I was coming out and walked down the long corridor lined with modern art and awards. I could hear them before I saw them. Kyle's voice was echoing off the marble walls, distinct and grating, carrying that specific tone of entitlement that always made my skin crawl. I rounded the corner to the reception area, and the scene was exactly as I had imagined. My father James was standing by a potted plant, looking uncomfortable in a suit that was 10 years out of style, clutching a briefcase that I knew was empty. Kyle, however, was center stage. He was leaning over the reception desk, pointing a finger in Jasmine's face, using his physical size to intimidate her. I demanded to speak to her, supervisor. Kyle was shouting, his face flushed red. Listen to me, sweetheart. I do not think you understand who I am. I am a business owner, and I am reporting an employee who is mentally unstable. You need to get someone with actual authority down here right now before I sue this entire firm for harboring a dangerous person. Jasmine looked at him with cool detachment. Sir, if you do not lower your voice, I will have you removed. Kyle laughed, a harsh barking sound. Remove me. I would like to see you try. I am a white male citizen, exercising my rights. This is a public building. It is a private firm, Kyle, I said, stepping into the lobby. My voice was not loud, but it cut through the noise instantly. Kyle spun around, his eyes lighting up with malicious glee. Ah, there she is, the prodigal daughter. Everyone, look at her, the woman who leaves her elderly parents to starve and freeze in the dark. He gestured to the empty lobby, as if performing for an audience. My father stepped forward, trying to look dignified. Sophia, this has gone far enough. You need to stop this nonsense. The power company said only the account holder can restore service. You are going to call them right now and apologize to your mother. I crossed my arms and leaned against the wall, unmoved. Dad, you are trespassing. And Kyle, you are harassing my staff. I suggest you leave before you embarrass yourselves further than you already have, Kyle sneered, stepping closer to me, invading my personal space. Embarrassed. You should be the one embarrassed, Sophia. We are here to tell your boss exactly what kind of person you are. We are going to tell them how you abuse your family, how you are financially unstable, how you stole our identity to book a fake trip. We will make sure you are fired by lunchtime. You will be lucky if you can get a job flipping burgers when I am done with you. I looked at him calmly, amazed at his delusion. You think you can get me fired? Kyle, you do not even know what I do here. I know you are just a number cruncher. Kyle spat. Probably an assistant to someone important. Well, I want to see that important person. Get your boss out here. Now, be careful what you wish for. A voice rang out from the double glass doors behind me. The air in the room changed instantly. Miranda Vance, the managing partner of the firm, stepped into the lobby. Miranda was a force of nature, a 6-foot-tall, black woman who wore bespoke Italian suits and commanded respect with a single glance. She had built this firm from the ground up, fighting through every barrier thrown in her way. She did not suffer fools, and she certainly did not suffer racists. Kyle turned to look at her, and I saw him visually assess her. He saw a black woman, and his internal bias immediately categorized her as someone he could bully. He assumed she was an office manager. Maybe? HR. He puffed his chest out again, smiling that condescending smile. Finally, someone who looks like they can follow instructions, Kyle said, smoothing his jacket. Are you the supervisor of this girl? Miranda walked forward, her heels clicking rhythmically on the marble floor. She stopped 3 feet from Kyle, looking down at him over her glasses. I am Miranda Vance, the Vance on the building sign outside. And you are disturbing my peace. Kyle faltered for a second, but his arrogance pushed him forward. Well, Ms. Vance, you have a problem employee here, Sophia? Jenkins. She is unstable. She has cut off her family finances. She is erratic, and quite frankly, she represents a liability to your company as a moral failure. We, as her concerned family, think you should terminate her immediately for the good of your reputation. Miranda looked at Kyle. Then she looked at my father, who was shrinking into the background. Then she looked at me. She did not look angry. She looked amused. Terminate her, Miranda repeated slowly, testing the word, like wine. Terminate, Sophia. Yes, Kyle said, sensing a victory. We can provide written statements about her character. Miranda laughed. It was a dry, terrifying sound. You want me to terminate a senior partner? The silence that followed was absolute, heavy and suffocating. Kyle blinked stupidly, confused. What? Miranda took a step closer to Kyle, her voice lowering to a deadly whisper. Sophia is not an assistant. She is not a mid-level manager. Sophia is a senior partner in this firm. She owns equity. She brings in more revenue in a single quarter than you have likely generated in your entire life. Her base salary alone is $500,000 a year, not including her profit sharing, which was substantial last year. So when you come into my lobby screaming at my receptionist and demanding I fire one of the owners of this company, you are not just being rude. You are making the biggest mistake of your pathetic life. I watched the realization hit them. It was like watching a car crash in slow motion. First came the shock. Kyle's mouth fell open, his brain trying to process the number. $500,000. He looked at me, and for the first time I saw fear. But then I looked at my father. James was staring at me. But the look in his eyes was not pride. It was not apology. It was hunger. Pure, unadulterated greed. He was doing the math in his head, calculating 10 years of my salary, realizing just how much money I actually had hidden from them. He realized that the $18,000 dinner was pennies to me, he realized. They had been begging for crumbs when they could have been trying to steal the whole loaf. So that is why you have the penthouse, my father whispered, his voice trembling, not with shame, but with avarice. You are rich. You are actually rich. Kyle recovered from his shock, and his face twisted into something ugly. Oh, so you have $500,000 a year, and you let your sister struggle. You let us drive a leased car when you could have bought it cash. You are even more selfish than I thought. You have been hoarding this money while we— Security, Miranda said sharply, cutting him off. 2 large guards who had been waiting in the wings stepped forward, taking Kyle by the arms. Get your hands off me, Kyle shrieked, struggling. I am her brother-in-law. She owes us. We are family. Remove him, Miranda said coolly. And if he returns, call the police and have him charged with trespassing and harassment. The guards dragged Kyle backward, his heels skidding on the polished floor. He was shouting obscenities now, his mask of superiority completely shattered, revealing the desperate grifter underneath. My father looked at me one last time, clutching his briefcase, his eyes pleading, not for forgiveness, but for a check. Sophia, please, we can talk about this. You have so much you can surely spare. Go home, Dad, I said, my voice ice cold. Go home and sit in the dark. The guards escorted my father out behind Kyle, pushing them through the revolving doors and onto the hot sidewalk. The lobby fell silent again. Jasmine let out a long breath and smoothed her blouse. Miranda turned to me, her expression softening. Just a fraction. Are you all right, Sophia? I nodded, straightening my blazer. Never better. Good, Miranda said, turning back toward the offices. Take the rest of the day off. Call your lawyer. Lock down your assets tight. Because now that they know the number, they are not going to stop. They are going to come for everything. I watched her walk away and knew she was right. The secret was out. They knew I was not just a safety net. I was a gold mine. And seeing the hunger in my father's eyes, I knew that the lawsuits were coming. I knew the guilt trips would ramp up. But they had made a fatal error. They thought money was my weakness, but money was my weapon, and I had a lot more ammunition than they did. I walked back to the elevator ready for the next phase. The gloves were off, and I was done playing the dutiful daughter. It was time to show them exactly what a senior partner does to liabilities. I liquidate them. I thought the humiliation in my office lobby would silence them for at least a week. I assumed that finding out I was a senior partner with the resources to crush them legally would make them retreat and lick their wounds. But I underestimated the desperation of a narcissist who feels their supply being cut off. My sister Ebony did not have a job and she did not have a credit line anymore. But she still had her phone and a Wi-Fi connection she was stealing from the coffee shop down the street. That evening I was sitting in my home office reviewing the draft of a restraining order when my phone began to buzz. It was not a text or a call. It was a notification from TikTok, then another from Instagram, then hundreds appearing in a cascade of digital hate. I opened the app and there it was. The video that was currently trending in Atlanta. Ebony was sitting in her car, likely because the house was sweltering hot without AC. She had the ring light attached to her dashboard, and she was crying. Not the ugly crying of genuine grief, but the pretty single tear crying she had perfected in high school drama club. Guys, I did not want to do this, she whispered into the camera, her voice trembling perfectly. I have been trying to protect my sister for years, but today she crossed a line. My sister Sophia has always been jealous of me. She has always wanted my life. She tried to get with my husband Kyle years ago, and when he chose me, she vowed to destroy us. Now she has cut off our power. She has stolen our money and she is trying to make our parents homeless just because she is bitter and alone. She is abusing her financial power to punish us for being happy. I watched the video with a detached fascination. It was a masterclass in manipulation. She had framed herself as the victim of a wealthy, vindictive spinster. Within hours, the video had 50,000 likes. The comments section was a cesspool of misinformed rage. People were calling for my head. One user wrote, "This is financial abuse. Someone needs to find this woman and teach her a lesson." Another wrote, "Imagine being rich and letting your parents starve just because you could not get the guy. What a witch." Hashtags like justice, for Ebony and boycott. Sterling and Vance started popping up. She was not just attacking my character. She was attacking my livelihood. If this gained enough traction, clients might start pulling away from my firm to avoid the controversy. Most people would have panicked. Most people would have gone into the comments section and started arguing, trying to defend themselves against a mob that had already made up its mind. But I do not argue with emotions. I argue with data. I am a forensic accountant. My entire career is built on the principle that numbers do not lie. People do. I picked up my phone and called my personal attorney, Davis. I did not even say hello. Davis, are you watching this? Yes, Sophia. I am watching it, Davis replied, his voice grim. We can sue her for defamation per se. This is malicious and false. Do it, I said. But a lawsuit takes months. I need to stop the bleeding tonight. Draft a cease and desist order immediately, but do not send it yet. I am going to release a statement, Sophia Davis warned. Be careful. The court of public opinion is messy. I am not going to write a statement, Davis. I am going to release the ledger. I hung up and opened my laptop. I navigated to the folder labeled Family Expenses. For 10 years, I had tracked every single penny I spent on them, not because I planned to use it against them, but because it was my job to be meticulous. I had receipts, bank transfer confirmations, credit card statements, and invoices. I opened a new spreadsheet and began to compile the data. It was a long list. The total at the bottom of the column was staggering even to me. $1,240,000 over 10 years. I decided to format it simply. I created a PDF document titled The Truth About the Jenkins Family Finances. Then I began to redact the sensitive account numbers, leaving the dates, the amounts, and the descriptions clearly visible. Row 1 was the mortgage payments for the house they lived in, totaling $400,000. Row 2 was the legal fees for Kyle, 2 DUIs and his assault charge from 3 years ago, totaling $55,000. Row 3 was the most damning. It was a series of payments to the Buckhead Plastic Surgery Center labeled Ebony Medical Expenses. In her video, Ebony claimed, "I was jealous of her natural beauty." I highlighted the $12,000 charge for her breast augmentation and the $8,000 charge for her liposuction, giving the document a very specific, chaotic energy. I also highlighted the payments for her wedding, which cost $60,000. The same wedding she claimed I tried to ruin. The same wedding where she supposedly stole Kyle from me. The receipts showed that not only did I pay for the venue, the catering, and her dress, I also paid for the honeymoon. I saved the document. Then I logged into my own dormant Twitter account and my LinkedIn page. I wrote a simple caption. My sister, Ebony Jenkins, has made serious public allegations regarding financial abuse and my character. In the interest of transparency, here is the full accounting of the financial support I have provided to my family over the last decade, totaling $1.2 million. This includes the funding for the lifestyle she is currently using to attack me. Facts over feelings. I hit upload. Then I sat back and waited. The internet is a fickle beast. It loves a victim, but there is one thing it loves more than a victim: receipts. The reaction was almost instantaneous. The first few comments were still hateful, but then the readers started arriving. People began to actually look at the document. The mood shifted from anger to shock, and then to hilarity. Wait a minute, one user commented. She said she was naturally perfect, but her sister paid 12 bands for her boobs. This is embarrassing. Another user wrote, look at page 4. She paid for the husband bail money 5 times. If my sister-in-law paid my bail, I would not be making TikToks about her. I would be washing her car. The tide turned so fast it gave me whiplash. The hashtag Justice for Ebony was hijacked by people posting screenshots of the most ridiculous expenses I had covered. One charge for a $4,000 handbag for Ebony. Birthday became a meme. Then came the legal hammer. My lawyer Davis emailed the cease and desist order to Ebony and posted a public notice that any further defamatory statements would result in immediate litigation, seeking damages for the full $1.2 million. I watched Ebony follower count start to drop. Her comments section, which had been filled with support, was now flooded with people calling her a grifter and a liar. The video she had posted was suddenly deleted, removed from her page in a panic. But nothing is ever truly deleted from the internet. Screen recordings of her crying, fake tears, were now being stitched together with my spreadsheet, creating a split-screen video that was going viral for all the right reasons. My phone buzzed again. It was a text from Ebony. You ruin everything. I hate you. Take it down, I replied, simply. You wanted to be an influencer. Ebony, now you are influencing people on the importance of financial literacy. You are welcome. I closed my laptop. The online mob had dispersed, or rather they had turned their torches on the real villain. My reputation was not just saved, it was enhanced. My boss, Miranda, sent me a short email. Brilliant crisis management. Remind me never to get on your bad side. I went to the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water. The silence in my apartment felt different tonight. It was the silence of victory. They had tried to attack me in my home, at my job, and now on the world stage. Every time they struck, I hit back harder, not with violence, but with the truth. They were learning the hard way, that when you bite the hand that feeds you, the hand might just slap you back with a 7-figure receipt. And I had plenty more receipts where those came from. The smell of stale cigarette smoke and cheap cologne hit me the moment I walked into the law office of Henderson and Associates. It was located in a rundown strip mall next to a vape shop and a discount mattress store, which set the perfect tone for the meeting. The carpet was a suspicious shade of brown, and the reception desk was unmanned, forcing my high-powered corporate attorney Davis and me to ring a rusted service bell just to get attention. This was the best legal representation my family could afford on short notice. I almost felt insulted. If they were going to sue me for everything I had earned, they could have at least hired someone who owned a vacuum cleaner. Davis adjusted his silk tie and gave me a side-eye that spoke volumes. He billed $800 an hour, and I knew he was mentally adding a hazard pay surcharge for simply breathing this air. I nodded slightly, telling him to be patient. This was not just a legal proceeding, it was theater, and I had a feeling the final act was going to be spectacular. We were ushered into a cramped conference room that smelled of mildew. My parents, James and Beatrice, were sitting on a lumpy beige sofa, looking like they were waiting for a lottery payout. My mother was wearing her pearls, trying to project an image of wronged dignity, while my father refused to make eye contact, staring intently at a water stain on the ceiling. Standing behind them was Kyle, acting as their self-appointed legal strategist, whispering into my father's ear like a devil on his shoulder. Opposite them sat Mr. Henderson, a man in a rumpled suit who looked like he chased ambulances for sport. He did not stand up when we entered. He just gestured to the 2 metal folding chairs on the other side of the scratched table. "Let us get right to it," Henderson said, shuffling some papers, giving me a slimy smile. "We are here to discuss the petition for filial support under Georgia state law and precedent in several jurisdictions. Adult children who have the means are obligated to provide for their indigent parents. Your parents are destitute. Sophia, they have no income, no assets, and no home. Thanks to your recent actions, we are demanding a monthly stipend of $5,000 plus immediate reinstatement of their housing." Kyle smirked from the corner, crossing his arms. "Yeah, Sophia, it is the law. You cannot just leave them to rot while you sit in a penthouse. You have to pay up." I sat perfectly still, my hands folded on the table. I did not look at Kyle. I looked at my father. "Dad, is this really how you want to do this? You want to sue your daughter for an allowance?" My father's jaw tightened. He finally looked at me, and I saw the desperation behind the anger. "We raised you, Sophia. We put clothes on your back. We fed you. Now you have millions and you treat us like strangers. It is only fair. Fair." I repeated the word, tasting the bitterness of it. Davis cleared his throat, the sound cutting through the tension like a knife. He did not open a folder. He did not look at his notes. He simply leaned forward, clasping his hands on the table, looking at Henderson with the pity one might show a toddler trying to solve a calculus problem. "Mr. Henderson." Davis began, his voice smooth and dangerous. "While you are correct that filial responsibility laws exist on the books, they are rarely enforced, but more importantly, you seem to have missed a crucial clause in the statute. The obligation to support a parent is null and void if there is documented evidence of abandonment or financial abuse by the parent against the child." Henderson waved a hand dismissively. There is no abuse here, just a family dispute. Davis smiled, and it was the terrifying smile of a shark sensing blood. Actually, there is. We are not talking about emotional abuse. We are talking about theft. Grand larceny, to be precise. I watched my father's face lose all its color. The smirk vanished from Kyle's face. Davis reached into his briefcase and pulled out a single thick file. He slid it across the table. The sound of the paper hitting the wood was the only sound in the room. These are bank records from 14 years ago. Davis said, narrating as Henderson opened the file. Sophia's grandmother left her a college fund totaling $50,000. It was in a custodial account meant to be transferred to her upon her 18th birthday. However, the records show that 2 weeks before that birthday, the entire balance was liquidated. My mother gasped, putting a hand to her mouth. James, you told me the market crashed. You told me the investments failed. Davis continued, ignoring her. The money was not lost in the market. It was withdrawn in cash at the cashier cage of the Beau Rivage Casino in Biloxi, Mississippi, over a span of 3 days. The signature on the withdrawal slip belongs to you, Mr. James Jenkins. The room went deadly silent. The hum of the vending machine in the hallway sounded like a jet engine. My father slumped in his seat, shrinking into himself. He looked small, old, and pathetic. You stole my future, Dad, I said, my voice steady, devoid of tears. I worked 3 jobs to put myself through Georgia State. I scrubbed toilets while you gambled away the only safety net I had. And now, 14 years later, you have the audacity to sit here and demand that I pay you for the privilege of being your victim. Henderson looked at the documents, then at his client. He closed the file abruptly, realizing his case had just evaporated. Mr. Jenkins, is this true? My father did not answer. He just stared at his hands. Kyle, however, was not ready to give up. He stepped forward, his face red. Wait, that was years ago. That is ancient history. You cannot hold that against him now. He needs money to live. Davis turned his gaze to Kyle, his eyes cold. The statute of limitations for criminal prosecution may have passed, but the statute for establishing a pattern of financial abuse in civil court has not. No judge in this state will grant alimony to a father who embezzled his daughter's education fund. In fact, if you pursue this, we will counter-sue for the principal amount, plus 14 years of interest. We will garnish his Social Security. We will take whatever pennies he has left. Kyle opened his mouth to argue, but Henderson held up a hand, shutting him up quiet. We are done here, Henderson said, his voice defeated, looking at my parents. I cannot win this case. You did not tell me about the casino. My mother turned to my father, hitting his arm with her purse. You lied to me, James. You said we were just unlucky. You gambled it away. You gambled away her school money. I stood up, smoothing my skirt. I felt a sense of finality. This was the last tie. The last little thread of guilt I had been holding on to was gone. They had tried to weaponize the law against me, and it had backfired spectacularly. Come on, Davis, I said, walking toward the door. I think we have wasted enough billable hours on this. I paused at the door and turned back to look at them one last time. My father was hiding his face in his hands. My mother was sobbing quietly. And Kyle was staring at the floor, defeated by the way Dad. I asked, my voice cutting through the gloom. How are you paying Mr. Henderson anyway? His retainer could not have been cheap, since you have no access to my credit cards anymore. I let the question hang in the air for a second, then delivered the final blow. Did you sell her wedding ring? Or is that next on the list? I did not wait, did. For an answer, I walked out of the dingy office and into the bright sunlight of the parking lot. The air tasted sweet, fresh, and clean. My phone buzzed in my pocket. Probably another threat or another plea, but it did not matter, I was free. And the best part was that I knew exactly what was coming next. Desperation makes people do stupid things, and Kyle was the most desperate of them all. He was about to make a mistake that would cost him a lot more than a lawsuit. It was only a matter of time before he tried to access the one thing he thought I had left unguarded, and I would be waiting for him. 2 weeks after the disaster at the law office, my Aunt Clara called me. Clara was my father's sister, but unlike him, she was a woman of peace, mostly because she refused to acknowledge that war ever existed. She was the type of woman who believed that any family trauma could be cured with enough potato salad and prayer. Usually in that order. She invited me to her annual summer barbecue, a neutral ground event, where the entire extended family would be gathering. I hesitated, knowing it was a trap, but my curiosity got the better of me. I wanted to see them. I wanted to see what defeat looked like up close. So I put on a white sundress, applied a layer of waterproof mascara just in case, and drove my Porsche to Clara House in the suburbs. The atmosphere when I arrived was thick with tension, heavily masked by the smell of charcoal and ribs. Conversations stopped the moment I walked into the backyard. My cousins gave me awkward waves but kept their distance, unsure if I was the villain or the hero of the family saga. I walked straight to Aunt Clara, who hugged me tight, whispering that she just wanted everyone to get along. Then came the performance. My mother, Beatrice, spotted me from the picnic table where she was holding court. She stood up, wiping her hands on a napkin, and walked toward me with her arms outstretched. It was an award-winning act. She did not look angry, she looked fragile. Her shoulders were slumped. Her eyes were misty, and she walked with a slight limp that I had never seen before. "Sophia, my baby," she crooned loud enough for the neighbors to hear. "I am so glad you came. We have missed you so much." She wrapped me in a hug that smelled of expensive perfume and desperation. I stood stiffly, allowing it, but not returning it. When she pulled back, she kept her hands on my shoulders, looking into my eyes. "I am sorry, Sophia," she said, her voice trembling. "We have been under so much stress. Your father and I. We just want what is best for everyone. Maybe we pushed too hard. We are just old and scared. We do not want to lose our daughter over money. Can we just start over? Can we just be a family again?" It was the apology I had wanted to hear for 20 years, but hearing it now, I realized it was hollow. It was not an apology for what they did. It was a strategy to get back what they lost. I looked over her shoulder and saw my father watching us warily from the grill. He gave me a curt nod, a silent truce born of necessity. I decided to play along. I softened my expression, letting my shoulders drop. "Okay, Mom," I said quietly. "I am tired of fighting too. Let us just try to have a nice day." The relief on her face was immediate and terrifyingly genuine. She thought she had cracked the code. She thought the ATM was back online. She patted my cheek and led me toward the main table, treating me like the prodigal son returning home. For the next hour, I was the center of attention. My family hovered around me, laughing too hard at my jokes, filling my plate with food, treating me with a level of respect that felt completely foreign. It was intoxicating, and if I were a weaker woman, I might have fallen for it. But I was not weak. I was observant. And the person I was observing most closely was Kyle. My brother-in-law had been unusually quiet. He was sitting at the edge of the patio, nursing a beer, watching me with eyes that were too alert. He was not sulking, which worried me. A sulking Kyle was predictable. Quiet Kyle was plotting. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the lawn, the party moved into a more relaxed phase. The music was turned up and people started dancing. Kyle finally made his move. He walked over to the cooler, grabbed 2 cold beers, and approached where I was sitting alone on a garden bench. He held a bottle out to me, peace offering. He said, a charming smile plastered on his face. "Look, Sophia, I know we have had our differences. I know I said some things I shouldn't have. I was stressed about the house, about the kids. I just want you to know I respect you. You built an empire and I should have respected that from day one." I looked at the beer, then at him. I took the bottle. "Thanks, Kyle. I appreciate that." He sat down next to me, not too close, just close enough to be conversational. "So are we good?" he asked, taking a sip. "No more lawsuits, no more police." I took a long drink, letting out a sigh. "We are good, Kyle. I made my point. You guys learned your lesson. I am ready to move on." "Excellent," Kyle said, relaxing visibly. "You know, Ebony is really sorry too. She is just embarrassed. She looks up to you so much." I nodded, feigning a slight tipsiness from the wine I had been drinking earlier. "Yeah, I know. It is just hard being the responsible one all the time, you know? Sometimes I just want to not worry about money." Kyle's eyes lit up at the word money. Barely perceptible, but I saw it. "Exactly," he said, leaning in. "You should not have to worry. You have great systems in place, right? Your investments run themselves." I laughed a little too loudly. "Absolutely. I can manage my entire portfolio from my phone. It is crazy. One click and I can move millions. Technology is wild." I pulled my phone out of my purse, acting careless. I let it dangle in my hand, swinging it slightly, knowing Kyle's eyes were glued to the screen. "Hey, let me show you this picture of the resort I stayed at last year," I said, slurring my words just a fraction. "It was amazing. You guys should go one day." I tapped the screen to wake it up. The keypad appeared, expecting my 6-digit passcode. I felt Kyle shift beside me. He was trying to look casual, taking a sip of his beer, but his eyes were darting sideways, locked onto my screen. I knew exactly what he was doing. He was memorizing the pattern. I moved my thumb slowly, deliberately telegraphing every movement, and 73429. I typed it in. The phone unlocked, revealing my home screen. I scrolled through my photos, showing him a picture of a beach in Turks and Caicos. "Wow," Kyle said, his voice tight. "Beautiful." I let the phone sit on my lap, screen still on, making sure he saw the banking app icon in the corner. It was the icon for a private offshore banking interface, usually reserved for high-net-worth clients. "I really need another drink," I said, standing up suddenly, leaving the phone on the bench. "Oops, let me grab that." No, stay there. I will get it for you," Kyle said quickly, standing up, almost knocking over his chair. "You relax. I will grab you a refill." Walked away toward the cooler, but I watched him in the reflection of the sliding glass door. He did not go to the cooler. He walked around the corner of the house, pulling his own phone out furiously, typing notes. He had memorized the passcode, 773429. I sat back down and suppressed a smile. Kyle thought he had just been handed the keys to the kingdom. He thought I was drunk and careless, revealing my security credentials in a moment of weakness. What he did not know was that 773429 was not my real passcode. It was a distress code, a feature I had set up years ago for clients who were under duress. If that code was entered, it would unlock the phone and grant access to a dummy version of the phone interface. It looked real. It acted real. It even had a banking app that would open and show a balance of $5 million. But it was a honeypot. Everything done inside that dummy interface was recorded, keystroke by keystroke. The banking app was a simulation connected to a tracing program. If someone tried to transfer money out, it would appear to work, giving the thief a sense of success, but in reality it would ping the location of the device attempting the transfer, capture the IP address, and send a silent alert to the FBI Cybercrimes Division. Kyle returned with a fresh beer, his smile now looking predatory. "Here you go, Sophia." "To family." "To family," I echoed, clinking my bottle against his. He sat with me for another 10 minutes, making small talk, but I could see his legs shaking. He was impatient. He wanted to leave. He wanted to get to a computer, or get his hands on my phone when I wasn't looking. "I think we are going to head out," he said abruptly, checking his watch. "Kids are tired." "Thanks for being so cool today, Sophia. Really, it means a lot." He stood up, signaling to Ebony. It was time to go. I watched them leave, waving goodbye from the driveway. Kyle walked with a bounce in his step, the strut of a man who thinks he has just won the lottery. He looked back at me one last time and flashed a smirk, a look of pure arrogance mixed with contempt. He was thinking about the millions he was going to steal. He was thinking about the revenge he was going to exact. I waved back, taking a sip of my beer, smiling sweetly. Run along, Kyle, I thought. Run home and dig your own grave. The shovel is in your hand, and you do not even know it. As their car disappeared down the street, I pulled out my phone. I entered my real passcode and opened my security app. I saw the notification straight away. Unauthorized access code logged. Attempt expected from unrecognized device. I tapped the setting labeled Enable Trap Mode. The bait was set. The water was chummed. Now all I had to do was wait for the shark to bite. And knowing Kyle greed, he wouldn't just bite, he would swallow the hook whole tonight. The digital trap I had set was baited, and Kyle did not just nibble at it, he swallowed it whole. It was 2 in the morning and the only light in my penthouse came from the glow of my 3 monitors. I was not sleeping, I was hunting. My forensic accounting software was running in the background, monitoring every credit bureau and financial institution associated with my social security number. I knew. Kyle was desperate. Desperation combined with arrogance is a dangerous cocktail. It makes people think they are invisible. It makes them take risks that any rational person would avoid. After the barbecue, he must have felt invincible, believing he had tricked me into revealing my security protocols. Or perhaps he had simply raided the old filing cabinets in my parents' attic, finding my tax returns from a decade ago. The first alert hit my screen at 2:14 in the morning. It was a hard inquiry on my credit report from a major lender. A credit card application for a premium travel rewards card had just been submitted. The applicant name was Sophia Jenkins. The income stated was $700,000. But the email address associated with the application was Sophia Mercedes Jenkins at gmail.com, an email address I had never created. I leaned forward, studying the metadata. The application originated from an IP address in Sandy Springs, specifically from a residential internet connection registered to Kyle Anderson. He was not even using a VPN. He was committing a federal felony from his living room sofa, likely while sipping the beer he had taken from my aunt cooler. Most people, upon seeing an identity theft attempt in progress, would panic. They would call the credit bureau immediately to freeze their file. They would call the bank to scream fraud. But I was not most people. I was playing a long game. A game where the objective was not just to stop the theft, but to secure a conviction. I watched the screen as the automated underwriting system processed the application. Because my credit score was 850, and my debt-to-income ratio was flawless, the approval was instantaneous. A digital card number was issued immediately, allowing the user to start spending before the physical card even arrived in the mail. I could imagine Kyle's face in that moment. The rush of dopamine seeing that approved message on his screen. He probably turned to Ebony, who was likely hovering over his shoulder, and told her that he had fixed everything. He was the hero. He was the provider. 10 minutes later, the second alert chimed. A transaction was being attempted. The merchant was Delta Airlines. The amount was $24,000. He was not just booking economy tickets, he was booking Delta One suites for 4 people. Round trip to Maui, fully refundable, though I doubted he planned to refund them. My finger hovered over the decline button on my banking override interface. It would be so easy to stop this right now, to cut off his supply and watch him panic. But if I stopped him now, it was just an attempted crime. It was a he said, she said situation. He could claim it was a misunderstanding or a glitch. I needed him to cross the line of no return. I needed the money to leave the bank. I needed the tickets to be issued. I needed grand larceny and wire fraud. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I had saved for emergencies, specifically for the fraud department of the issuing bank. I had a contact there, a senior investigator named Roberts, whom I had worked with on a previous embezzlement case. Roberts picked up on the second ring, his voice groggy. Sophia, it is 2:30 in the morning. This better be good. It is better than good. Roberts, I said. my eyes never leaving the screen. I have a live one. Identity theft in progress. The perpetrator is using my credentials to book flight tickets totaling $24,000. I will kill the card, Robert said instantly. I could hear the clicking of his keyboard. I can have the account frozen in 10 seconds. No, I said sharp and commanding. Do not freeze it, Roberts. Do not decline the charge. There was a pause on the line. Excuse me. I want you to authorize the transaction, I said calmly. Let the payment go through. Let the tickets be issued. I want a record of the completed sale. I want the PNR number, and I want the confirmation email sent to the fraudulent address he created. Sophia Roberts warned, his voice dropping to a serious whisper. If we authorize this, you are liable for that money until we can prove fraud in a court of law. You are looking at a 24 grand hole in your pocket. I know the risks, I said. I am building a case. Roberts, this is not just some random hacker in a basement. This is a family member attempting to defraud me. The local police will call it a civil dispute if I just stop him now. I need federal charges. I need wire fraud. I need him to board that plane, or at least attempt to. Roberts sighed, the sound of a man who knew better than to argue with me. You are terrifying. You know that. Fine. I am flagging the account as under surveillance, but I am overriding the fraud block. The charge is going through now. I watched the screen. The status changed from pending to approved. Got him, I whispered. Kyle had just successfully stolen $24,000. He likely high-fived my sister. He probably woke up my parents to tell them the good news that the trip was back on, that he had secured the funding through a business bonus or some other lie. But in reality, he had just purchased 4 tickets to federal prison. I thanked Roberts and hung up, but I was not done. The FBI has a specific division for white-collar crime. And while they usually deal with corporate espionage, a case this clean with a victim willing to do the legwork was a gift-wrapped present for them. I drafted an email to Agent Miller, a contact I had at the Atlanta field office. Subject: wire fraud and identity theft in progress. Evidence attached. I attached the IP logs, the credit inquiry report, and the transaction details. I explained that the suspect was a relative, and that I was allowing the crime to proceed to ensure an arrest could be made at a federal checkpoint, specifically the airport. I sat back in my chair, the adrenaline finally starting to fade, replaced by a cold, hard satisfaction. Kyle thought he was playing chess, but he was actually playing Russian roulette, and he had just pulled the trigger on a loaded chamber. My phone buzzed with a text message. It was from my mother. So glad things are working out. Kyle told us he surprised us with the tickets. See, I knew you would come around and help us in spirit. Family always finds a way. I stared at the message. The level of delusion was staggering. They actually believed that the universe, or perhaps my silent compliance, had provided this for them. They did not question where the money came from. They did not care, as long as they got their way. I typed a reply, then deleted it. No silence was better. Let them pack their bags. Let them drive to the airport. Let them stand in the TSA line with their Louis Vuitton luggage and their smug smiles. The higher they climbed, the harder the fall would be. I looked at the transaction log one last time. The airline tickets were just the beginning. Now that the card was active, Kyle was feeling bold. Another alert popped up. A charge for $2,000 at a luxury resort. Where website? He was buying new clothes for the trip. Buy it all, Kyle, I said to the empty room. Buy the swimsuits. Buy the sunglasses. Deck yourself out in stolen luxury, because where you are going, the only outfit you will be wearing is an orange jumpsuit, and it is not going to be tailored. I closed the laptop and walked to the window, looking out at the sleeping city. The war was over, the trap was sprung. Now all I had to do was wait for the harvest. The flight was scheduled for Friday morning, giving me 48 hours to coordinate with the authorities. 48 hours for them to dig their hole so deep they would never see the sun again. I went to bed, not with worry but with the peaceful anticipation of a hunter who knows the prey is already in the cage. The 48 hours leading up to their departure were a study in human delusion. I sat in the stillness of my penthouse, watching the final act of a tragedy play out in real time. My phone, which had been relatively quiet since the law office debacle, suddenly came alive. It started on Wednesday afternoon, just 2 days before their flight to Hawaii. My sister Ebony was the first to break the silence, sending a text that was meant to be a victory lap. "Look at us winning without you. We do not need your charity, Sophia. We have our own resources. Enjoy your lonely life with your spreadsheets while we sip Mai Tais on the beach." I read the message and felt nothing but a cold amusement. She truly believed that money had magically fallen from the sky. She did not question where Kyle suddenly got a credit limit high enough to book a $40,000 vacation. She just accepted the abundance because in her mind, she deserved it. Then came the social media blitz. I opened Instagram, and there it was, the post that would eventually become Exhibit B in a federal court case. Ebony had posted a photo of 4 first-class boarding passes spread out on a marble countertop. The caption read, "Upgrades only. The universe provides when you cut out toxic energy. Hawaii. Here we come. Blessed. First class. Family." First, I zoomed in on the photo, clearly seeing the confirmation numbers and the flight details. Delta Flight 882, departing Atlanta at 10 in the morning on Friday. They were flying Delta One fully lie-flat seats, usually reserved for business moguls and celebrities. And they were paying for it with my credit rating, using the identity Kyle had stolen from me. I took a screenshot, saving it to the folder labeled Federal Wire Fraud. Then I sent a copy to Agent Miller at the FBI with a simple note. "They are confirmed for Friday morning." But the digital taunts were only half the story. I wanted to see them. I wanted to see the physical manifestation of their arrogance. So I poured myself a cup of chamomile tea and opened my laptop, logging into the hidden security interface of my parents' house. Years ago, when I bought the house for them, I had installed a comprehensive security system. Ostensibly, it was to protect them from burglars. In reality, it was because I knew my father had a gambling problem and my sister had sticky fingers. I needed to know if they were pawning the furniture. I brought up the feed from the living room. It was a scene of chaotic gluttony. The floor was covered in shopping bags from Lenox Square Mall, bright orange, Hermes bags, black and white, Chanel bags, and massive boxes from Neiman Marcus. Kyle was standing in the center of the room, acting like a general commanding troops. He was holding a beer in one hand and pointing with the other, directing my father to move boxes. "We need to pack the golf clubs," Kyle was saying, his voice tinny through the microphone. "I booked us a tea time at the plantation course. It is $500 a round. But who cares, right? We are living large." My father James looked younger than he had in years. The weight of the poverty I had inflicted on them seemed to have vanished, replaced by the artificial high of spending money that wasn't his. He was laughing, unfolding a brand new silk shirt, holding it up against his chest. "This is Italian silk, Kyle. You really outdid yourself. Son, I knew you would come through for us." Sophia never understood style like this. I took a sip of tea, the warmth spreading through my chest. They were praising the thief for spending the victim money. Then I saw the luggage. Sitting on the sofa were 4 brand new Louis Vuitton rolling trunks. The classic monogram canvas shining under the living room lights. Those bags cost $4,000 each. That was $16,000 of luggage, just to carry their stolen clothes. Ebony walked into the frame, modeling a white linen dress and a wide-brimmed hat. She spun around, posing for an invisible camera. "Do I look like a rich housewife?" she asked. Giggling, "You look like $1,000,000, baby," Kyle said, slapping her on the rear. "You look like you belong in the VIP lounge." I watched them celebrate their own destruction. It was fascinating. The psychology of the grifter is a powerful thing. They had convinced themselves that this was not a crime, but a correction. They believed they were entitled to this lifestyle, and that Kyle had simply found a loophole, a clever way to access the wealth I had unfairly hoarded. My mother Beatrice came in from the kitchen holding a tray of sandwiches. She looked worried, but she was swept up in the energy. "Are you sure this is all okay, Kyle?" she asked, putting the tray down. "That is a lot of money on one card." Kyle waved her off. "Mom, stop worrying. I told you. I closed a massive deal with a developer in Buckhead. The commission just hit. This is my money. We are good. Sophia isn't the only one who can make money in this town." He was lying so effortlessly. He lied to his wife. He lied to his in-laws. And he was lying to himself. He had built a castle on a foundation of sand, and the tide was coming in fast. I switched camera views to the driveway. The Mercedes was gone, towed days ago, but in its place sat a rented Cadillac Escalade, another expense charged to the fraudulent card. They had rented a luxury SUV just to drive to the airport because showing up in an Uber was beneath them. I watched them for an hour, watching them pack, watching them laugh, watching them toast to their good fortune. They were so happy, so undeniably, radiantly happy. And it was all because they thought they had beaten me. They thought they had escaped my control. My cat. Onyx jumped up onto the desk purring loudly, rubbing his sleek black head against my hand. I scratched him behind the ears, my eyes never leaving the screen where Kyle was currently trying to stuff a bottle of expensive champagne into his suitcase. "They have no idea." "Onyx," I whispered to the cat. "They are packing for a vacation, but they are really packing for prison." I closed the laptop screen, unable to watch anymore. The level of waste was nauseating but necessary. I needed the total theft amount to cross the $100,000 threshold to ensure mandatory minimum sentencing guidelines. With the luggage, the clothes, the flights, and the hotel deposits, Kyle had easily cleared that bar. I walked to the floor-to-ceiling window of my penthouse looking out at the city lights. The same city they were planning to fly out of in less than 48 hours. My phone buzzed again. Another text from Ebony. "Make sure you watch our stories on Friday. We are going to live stream the takeoff running away from your negativity." "Bye, Felicia." I smiled, a genuine smile for the first time in days. "Run fast, Ebony." I thought. "Run as fast as you can because you are running straight into a wall." I picked up Onyx, holding him close, feeling his rhythmic purr against my chest. "Let them fly high," I said softly, looking at the reflection of my own eyes in the glass. "Let them climb all the way to the clouds, because the higher they are, the harder the fall is going to hurt. And when they hit the ground, I won't be there to catch them. I will be the one holding the shovel to bury the remains." I turned off the lights in my apartment, leaving only the city glow. Friday morning was going to be a spectacle, and I had a front row seat. The arrogance was the anesthesia, masking the pain that was about to come. And the surgery was scheduled for 10 a.m. sharp. Friday morning arrived with the humidity typical of Atlanta, but inside the climate-controlled terminal of Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport, the air was cool and smelled of jet fuel and expensive coffee. I was not physically present at the airport. Of course, I was sitting in my living room wearing my silk pajamas, holding a cup of Earl Grey tea, watching the events unfold on a 50-inch monitor. Thanks to the wonders of modern technology and my sister's obsession with social media, Ebony had started her live stream the moment the rented Cadillac Escalade pulled up to the curbside. Check-in. The title of her stream was VIP Life Hawaii Edition, and she already had 300 viewers watching her parade around like royalty. I watched as Kyle stepped out of the vehicle wearing a white linen suit that looked ridiculous for a commercial flight, along with a fedora that he probably thought made him look like a movie star, but actually made him look like a Prohibition-era gangster on a budget. He snapped his fingers at the sky cap, pointing imperiously at the 4 Louis Vuitton trunks stacked in the trunk of the SUV. "Be careful with those, my man," Kyle said, his voice booming through ebony phone microphone. That luggage costs more than your car. I took a sip of tea, feeling the warmth settle in my stomach. The arrogance was almost impressive. They walked through the automatic doors, pushing past a family struggling with a stroller, their noses high in the air. Ebony panned the camera around to show off her outfit, a sundress she had bought yesterday with the stolen credit card number, waving to her followers. "We are heading straight to the Delta One check-in," she narrated, her voice high and breathless. "No lines for us today, guys. When you manifest abundance, the universe opens the red velvet ropes." They approached the dedicated priority check-in area, a quiet, carpeted enclave away from the chaos of the main terminal. The desk agent, a woman with a tight bun and a professional smile, greeted them. "Passports, please," she said. Kyle slapped the stack of 4 passports onto the counter along with his phone, which displayed the digital boarding passes. "We are all set, sweetheart. Just need to check these bags and get directions to the lounge. We need some champagne before wheels up." I watched the agent pick up the passports. She scanned Kyle's passport first, then scanned the boarding pass on his phone. On my screen, I could not see the agent monitor, but I knew exactly what was happening. The moment that barcode was scanned, it triggered a silent alarm in the Department of Homeland Security system. It was the digital equivalent of stepping on a landmine. The agent's smile faltered just for a fraction of a second. She typed something quickly on her keyboard, then typed again. Her brow furrowed. "Is there a problem?" Kyle asked, leaning over the counter, his tone shifting from charming to annoyed. "We are in a hurry." "Just a moment, sir," the agent said, her voice tight. "The system is asking for a manual verification of the payment method. The card used for this booking has been flagged for a security check." Kyle laughed, a nervous barking sound. "That is ridiculous. It is a black card. It has no limit. Just run it again. You probably typed it wrong." Ebony turned the camera to face Kyle, zooming in on his face. "Babe, what is going on?" she asked, her voice wavering slightly. "Nothing," Kyle snapped, looking at the phone camera. "Stop filming for a second." "No, keep filming," I whispered to the screen. "Do not stop now." "Ebony." Suddenly, the agent took a step back from the counter and 2 men in dark suits who had been standing near the wall began to walk toward them. They were not airport security. They were not local police. They were federal agents wearing the distinct windbreakers that read FBI on the back, flanked by 2 uniformed officers from the Port Authority. Kyle saw them, and his face went the color of ash. He took a step back, bumping into the stack of Louis Vuitton luggage. "Kyle Anderson." One of the agents said, his voice cutting through the ambient noise of the terminal. Kyle tried to smile, but it looked like a rictus of terror. "Yes, that is me. Is there an issue with the upgrade? Because I can pay the difference if—" "Turn around and place your hands behind your back," the agent barked, pulling a pair of metal handcuffs from his belt. The live stream went chaotic as Ebony screamed, dropping the phone. The camera landed face up on the carpet, capturing the ceiling and the frantic movement of legs. I could hear the scuffle. Kyle tried to pull away instinctively, a moment of resistance that he would instantly regret. "Get on the ground. Now." I heard the sickening thud of a body hitting the floor, followed by the click, click, click of ratchets tightening. The camera was kicked slightly and tilted, showing Kyle pressed face down into the airport carpet, his white linen suit claiming the dust and grime, the fedora rolling away like a discarded prop. Ebony was shrieking now, a high-pitched wail that drew the attention of everyone in the terminal. "Wait! No! This is a mistake! My sister paid for this. Sophia Jenkins. She bought these tickets. Ask her." The agent hauled Kyle to his feet, grabbing him by the back of his expensive jacket. Kyle was gasping for air, sweat already beading on his forehead, ruining his makeup. "You are under arrest for 12 counts of federal wire fraud, aggravated identity theft, and grand larceny." The agent recited, his voice calm and professional. "You are also being detained for violation of the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act." My parents, James and Beatrice, were standing frozen next to the luggage cart. My mother was clutching her pearls, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. My father looked like he was having a stroke, his eyes wide fixed on the handcuffs around Kyle's wrists. Ebony lunged toward the agent, pointing at the phone on the floor. "Call Sophia. She did this. She set us up. She gave us the card." The agent looked at Ebony coolly. "We have the affidavit from Ms. Jenkins right here, along with the IP logs from your husband's computer creating the fraudulent account. We also have the surveillance footage of him purchasing these goods with a stolen identity. You have the right to remain silent, ma'am, and I suggest you use it because you are listed as an accomplice." The crowd that had gathered was massive. Travelers were holding up their own phones, recording the downfall of the family that had just moments ago been sneering at them. The irony was poetic. The people they had looked down upon were now documenting their humiliation. Kyle looked at the camera, his eyes wild, and desperate. "Sophia," he screamed, looking directly into the lens, knowing I was watching somewhere. "Sophia, tell them you said it was okay. Help me." I sat in my penthouse and took another sip of tea. It was the best cup of tea I had ever tasted. "No, Kyle," I said softly to the empty room. "I do not think I will." The officers began to march them away. My father was protesting weakly, trying to distance himself from Kyle, while my mother was crying, asking about her reputation. Ebony picked up her phone, realizing the stream was still running, and hastily ended the broadcast, cutting the feed to black. I sat there for a moment in the silence. The show was over. The villains had been captured. The evidence was irrefutable. They had not just stolen money, they had stolen it across state lines, using a federal banking system, turning a family dispute into a federal crime. I stood up and walked to the window, stretching my arms. The sun was fully up now, shining bright over Atlanta. Somewhere down below, police transport van was making its way to the federal detention center. Down there it was hot and cramped and smelled of fear. Up here it was cool and quiet. I picked up my phone and dialed my lawyer. "Davis." "It is done," I said simply. "They are in custody." "Excellent," Davis replied. "Do you want me to go down there and represent them?" I laughed, a low, throaty sound. "Represent them?" "No, Davis. I want you to go down there and serve them with the eviction notice for the house. They are going to need a place to stay when they make bail. If they make bail. And it certainly won't be in my property." I hung up and looked at my reflection in the glass. My eyes were clear. The weight that had been pressing on my chest for 10 years was gone. I had not just cut the cord, I had burned the bridge and watched the fire from a safe distance. And it was beautiful. Now all that was left was to clean up the ashes. The federal holding facility at Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport was a stark contrast to the Delta One lounge my family had expected to be sitting in. There were no complimentary mimosas here and certainly no lie-flat seats. The walls were painted a depressing shade of institutional beige, and the air smelled of industrial cleaner and stale sweat. I stood in the observation room staring through the one-way mirror at the people who shared my DNA. They were seated around a bolted metal table, looking less like the high society family they pretended to be, and more like exactly what they were: criminals caught in the act. Agent Miller stood beside me, his arms crossed, holding a clipboard. He looked at me with a mixture of respect and pity. "Ms. Jenkins, are you ready to proceed? We can do this separately if you prefer, but given the conflicting statements we have already received during the initial booking, I believe a group confrontation might yield the truth faster." I nodded, my eyes fixed on my mother. Beatrice. She was slumped in her chair, clutching a tissue to her chest, her expensive makeup streaked down her face, making her look like a melting wax figure. Beside her, my father James was staring at the table, refusing to make eye contact with anyone. And then there was Kyle and Ebony, sitting as far apart from each other as the handcuffs would allow. The golden couple was tarnished. "Let them talk," I said softly. "I want to hear what they have to say." Miller pressed a button on the console, and the audio from the interrogation room flooded our small dark booth. He then walked out of the observation room and entered the interrogation room, slamming the heavy door behind him. The sound made everyone jump, except Kyle, who just looked defeated. Miller sat down, throwing a file folder onto the table. The noise echoed in the small room. He looked at each of them in turn, letting the silence stretch until it was unbearable. "We have a problem, folks," Miller began, his voice deceptively calm. "You were stopped attempting to board an international flight with tickets purchased using a stolen identity. The credit card used belongs to Sophia Jenkins. The total fraudulent charges, including the luxury goods found in your possession, exceed $100,000. That puts us firmly in federal territory. Now, before I start writing up the official charges, does anyone want to tell me whose idea this was?" The reaction was instantaneous, and it was exactly what I expected from a family of parasites. Survival instinct kicked in, overriding any sense of loyalty. "It was him!" Ebony shrieked, pointing a manicured finger at her husband. "It was all Kyle." "We didn't know anything, officer. I swear. He told us he closed a big real estate deal. He told us he got a commission check for 50 grand. He said he wanted to treat the family because we have been so stressed lately." My mother jumped in, nodding furiously, her voice trembling. "Yes, that is right. We are just elderly parents. We don't know how these digital things work. Kyle booked everything. He handled the luggage. He handled the car. We thought it was his money. We would never steal from our own daughter. We love Sophia." I watched through the glass, feeling a cold lack of surprise. They were throwing him to the wolves without a second thought. My father, James, finally looked up, adding his shovel of dirt to Kyle's grave. I asked him. James lied, his voice shaking. I asked him specifically, "Kyle, is this money clean?" And he looked me in the eye and said, "Yes, he tricked us. He used us to mule those stolen goods. We are victims here just as much as Sophia is." I looked at Kyle. His face was a mask of shock. He looked from his wife to his in-laws, his mouth opening and closing silently. He had spent 5 years trying to impress these people, trying to buy their affection with leased cars and picked up tabs. And now, the moment the heat was turned up, they were treating him like a stranger. Miller looked at Kyle, raising an eyebrow. "Well, Mr. Anderson, your wife and in-laws seem to think you are the mastermind here. What do you have to say about that? Did you trick them?" Kyle's face turned, a deep, violent red. The veins in his neck bulged against his collar. He let out a laugh that sounded more like a sob. "You liars!" he screamed, slamming his cowned hands onto the table, causing my mother to flinch. "You lying snakes, you knew, you all knew." He turned to Miller, desperate to save himself. "Officer, do not listen to them. They are lying through their teeth. They were there when I opened the account. They were the ones who told me to do it." Ebony gasped, putting a hand to her chest. "That is a lie. I would never." "Shut up, Ebony." Kyle roared, silencing her. "You were the one who said Sophia owes us. You said her money is family money. You said she would never press charges because she is too weak. You stood over my shoulder while I typed in her social security number. You picked out the flight seats. You told me to upgrade to first class because you didn't want to sit near the bathroom." He turned to my father. "And you, James, you told me to pawn Sophia. Watch to pay for the deposit on the rental car. You told me that as the patriarch of the family, you authorized me to use whatever means necessary to get us to Hawaii. You said Sophia was just a bank account and that we had the right to make a withdrawal." My father's face went pale. "That is slander. I never said that." Miller looked up at the mirror, knowing I was watching. He held up a hand, silencing the squabbling family. "Enough," Miller said sharply. "It seems we have a classic case of," he said, she said, "the husband claims a conspiracy, the family claims ignorance. Usually this would take weeks to unravel." Miller stood up and walked over to the wall monitor. He pulled a small USB drive from his pocket, the one I had given him 10 minutes ago. However, Miller continued, Ms. Jenkins is a forensic accountant. She deals in evidence, not stories, and it seems she has a very sophisticated security system in her parents' home, a system that records audio and high-definition video. The color drained from Ebony's face entirely. My mother stopped crying mid-sob. Her eyes darted around the room as if looking for a camera, hidden in the walls. Miller plugged the drive into the room. Media player. Let us see who is telling the truth, shall we? He pressed play. The video on the screen was crisp and clear. It showed the living room of my parents' house from 2 days ago. The audio was perfect. Kyle's voice filled the interrogation room. We need to pack the golf clubs. It is $500 a round. But who cares, right? We are living large. Then my father's voice. James was on screen, holding up a silk shirt praising Kyle. This is Italian silk. Kyle, you really outdid yourself, son. I knew you would come through for us. Sophia never understood style like this. Then Ebony's voice clear as a bell mocking me. Do I look like a rich housewife? But the most damning part was the conversation that followed, captured near the kitchen island. My mother, Beatrice, was on screen holding a glass of champagne. Are you sure Sophia won't notice the charge? She asked. Kyle laughed on the recording. Let her notice. By the time she figures it out, we will be on the beach. And what is she going to do? Arrest her own mother? She is too soft. She will just pay the bill like she always does. Beatrice laughed, sipping her drink. You are right. She is desperate for our approval. She will pay it just to keep us talking to her. The video ended freezing on my mother, laughing face. The silence in the interrogation room was absolute. It was the silence of a tomb. The lies had not just been exposed, they had been incinerated. Miller turned off the monitor and looked at my parents. So, Mrs. Jenkins, you were saying? You thought it was a commission check. You were saying you would never steal from your daughter. My mother looked at the table, then at the mirror. She knew I was behind it. She knew I was watching. Suddenly she broke. It wasn't a cry of remorse. It was a scream of pure terror and entitlement. Sophia! She shrieked, staring directly at the glass, realizing her performance was over. Sophia, stop this right now. Stop this, right? No, you are in there? Tell them to let us go. I am your mother. You cannot do this to me. I carried you. I gave you life. You owe me this. She lunged toward the glass, her hands clawing at the air before Miller restrained her. Sophia, she screamed, her voice cracking, breaking into a hysterical wail. Save me. Do not let them take me to prison. I am old. I will die in there. You ungrateful child. Get in here and fix this. I stood in the observation room watching her unravel. She wasn't asking for forgiveness. She was demanding obedience. Even now. She still thought she had power over me. She thought that her title of mother was a get-out-of-jail-free card. Miller wrestled her back into her chair, handcuffing her to the table. Ebony was sobbing quietly, her head on the table, defeated. Kyle was staring at the wall, a hollow look in his eyes, realizing that his marriage and his life were over. I pressed the intercom button, my voice projecting into the interrogation room. Calm and amplified. I fixed it, Mother, I said, coldness radiating from every word. I fixed the glitch in my life. You said I was just a bank account. Well, the bank is closed. And as for owing you, I think 12 years of financial abuse settles the debt. I released the button, cutting off her response. I turned to the other officer in the observation room. I am ready to sign the formal statement. Now, I said, pressing the files against my chest. I want to press charges on every single count. No plea deals, no mercy. As I walked out of the room, I could still hear my mother's screams muffled by the heavy door. But they didn't sound like commands anymore. They sounded like the fading noise of a past I had finally left behind. I walked out of the police station, and into the airport terminal. Not as a daughter, but as a free woman with a very light schedule and a very bright future. While my family was being processed at the Federal Detention Center, trading their linen suits and silk dresses for standard-issue orange jumpsuits, I was busy executing the final clause of our unwritten contract. The timeline was tight. I knew that federal bail hearings could be swift, especially for non-violent offenders with no prior criminal record. Well, except for Kyle. I estimated I had about 48 hours of unencumbered access to the property before they scraped together enough money for a bail bondsman. I pulled up to the driveway of the Mediterranean villa at 8 in the morning. My Porsche looked sleek against the backdrop of the house. A house that on paper belonged to Phoenix Holdings, LLC. My parents had lived here for 5 years, boasting to their friends about their estate, oblivious to the fact that Phoenix Holdings was just a shell company I established solely to keep a roof over their heads. The lease agreement they had signed without reading clearly stated that any criminal activity conducted on the premises resulted in an immediate termination of tenancy and eviction. I stepped out of the car and signaled to the convoy behind me. 3 massive moving trucks idled on the street along with a locksmith van and a landscaping crew. I was not just evicting them, I was erasing them. I unlocked the front door with my master key. The air inside was stale-smelling of the expensive perfume my mother wore and the lingering scent of Kyle pretension. I walked into the foyer and clapped my hands, calling the foreman of the moving crew. Inside, everything goes, I said, my voice echoing off the high ceilings. You have 6 hours. Pack the personal effects into standard cardboard boxes and transport them to the U-Store. IT facility on the outskirts of town. Prepay for 1 month of storage. After that, it is their problem. Furniture goes to the auction house. Anything broken or trash goes to the dump. The crew got to work immediately. It was a symphony of destruction. The sound of packing tape, ripping, and heavy boots on hardwood floors filled the house. I walked through the rooms, supervising the dismantling of their ego. The velvet sofa where my mother held court and judged my life choices was wrapped in plastic and hauled away. The massive flat-screen TV where Kyle watched golf while unemployed was pulled from the wall, leaving a ghost outline of dust. I went into my father's study. He had shelves lined with books he never read and trophies he bought at flea markets to look accomplished. I watched the movers sweep the shelves into boxes indiscriminately. A first edition classic tossed in with a half-empty bottle of scotch. It was ruthless but necessary. The house was an asset, and they were a liability that had depreciated to zero. By noon, the house was unrecognizable. The clutter of their lives was gone. The oriental rugs were rolled up, revealing the dark wood beneath. The curtains were taken down, letting the harsh midday sun flood the rooms, exposing the scuff marks on the walls and the stains on the carpet. The house looked bigger, but it also looked hollow. It had lost its personality, and in doing so, it had regained its value. The locksmith was the next to perform his surgery. He drilled out the cores of the heavy oak front doors, installing high-security smart locks that could only be operated with a biometric scan or a code that only I possessed. He moved to the back doors, the garage, even the windows. Every point of entry was sealed tight. At 3 o'clock, the real estate agent arrived. She was a shark in a blazer, a woman I had worked with on several commercial deals. She walked through the empty, echoing rooms, clicking her heels on the floor. It will stage beautifully. Sophia, she said, taking notes. We can list it for $2.5 million. The market is hot right now. When can we put the sign up? Right now, I said. Do not wait. I want the sign in the yard before the sun goes down. I watched from the porch as the wooden post was hammered into the manicured lawn. The sign swung in the gentle breeze. For sale. Phoenix Holdings, immediate possession. I left a single white envelope taped to the glass of the front door. Inside, facing out, it contained the eviction notice, the location of the storage unit, and the single key to the padlock on that unit. It was the only key they would be getting from me. I drove away, Just as the sun began to dip below the tree line, the house was silent, empty and purged. I felt a strange lightness, as if I had just exorcised a demon. The physical space where they had plotted against me, where they had laughed at my expense, was no longer theirs. It was just inventory. 36 hours later, the inevitable happened. My phone alerted me that the security system at the house had detected motion at the front door. I was at my office sitting in a glass-walled conference room, but I paused the meeting to open the app I needed to see this. The camera feed loaded, showing a taxi van pulling up to the curb. It was a sad sight. My parents stepped out looking 10 years older than they had 2 days ago. My mother's hair was flat and greasy, her makeup gone, revealing the deep lines of stress on her face. My father wore the same clothes he had been arrested in now, rumpled and stained. Ebony followed, looking like a ghost, her eyes red and swollen. Kyle was the last to emerge, moving stiffly, likely sore from sleeping on a concrete bench. They stood on the sidewalk for a moment staring at the house, then they saw it. The for sale sign planted firmly in the middle of the lawn. I saw my mother mouth the word, "No." She grabbed my father's arm, shaking him, pointing at the sign. They hurried toward the front door, desperation giving them a burst of energy. Kyle reached the door first. He fumbled in his pocket, pulling out his key ring. He jammed his key into the lock and twisted. It didn't turn. He twisted harder, rattling the handle, putting his shoulder into the wood, trying to force it. "It is not working," he shouted, his voice tinny on the audio feed. She changed the locks. Ebony pushed him aside. "Let me try." She tried her key. Nothing. The mechanism was solid, unyielding steel. My mother pressed her face against the glass, shielding her eyes with her hands, trying to see inside. She screamed a sound that was muffled by the heavy door but still audible. "It is empty, James. The furniture is gone. Everything is gone." My father stumbled back, stepping off the porch as if he had been punched. He looked up at the house, at the windows that were now dark and bare. He realized in that moment that they were not just locked out, they were homeless. Kyle ran around the side of the house, trying the garage keypad, trying to pry open a window, but the security shutters were down. He came back to the front, breathing hard, kicking the for sale sign in a fit of impotent rage. "We have to break in," Ebony cried. "We live here. This is illegal. She cannot do this." My father shook his head, staring at the envelope taped to the glass. He ripped it down, tearing it open with shaking hands. He pulled out the legal document and read it aloud, his voice breaking. "Notice of termination of lease, due to violation of Clause 14, Section B. Criminal activity on premises all. Occupants are hereby evicted. Effective immediately. Personal property has been moved to storage facility. B access code provided." My mother sank down onto the porch steps, burying her face in her hands. She wailed, a sound of pure despair. "Where are we going to go, James? We have no money. We have no cards. We cannot go to a hotel." I watched them on the small screen, a huddled mass of defeat on the doorstep of a life they used to own. They had spent years relying on my safety net, thinking it was a hammock they could lounge in forever. They never realized it was actually a tightrope, and I had just cut the line. My father pulled out his phone, probably to call me, but he paused, remembering that I had blocked him, remembering that I was the one who had done this. He put the phone away and looked at his family. "We have to walk," he said, his voice hollow. "Walk where?" Ebony asked, looking at her heels. "To the shelter," my father said, looking at the ground. "It is the only place that will take us without a credit card." I watched them gather their few belongings, trudging down the long driveway past the sign that announced their displacement. They looked small against the backdrop of the setting sun, wandering into a future that was cold, uncertain, and entirely of their own making. I closed the app and put my phone face down on the conference table. Sorry about that, I said to my colleagues, turning back to the presentation. Let us continue discussing the quarterly projections. The house was empty, the accounts were closed, and my conscience was clear. The slate was not just wiped clean, it was smashed to pieces, and I was ready to build something new on the rubble, something that belonged only to me. The federal courthouse in downtown Atlanta was a fortress of limestone and granite, a stark contrast to the flimsy house of cards my family had built their lives upon inside courtroom 4B. The air was frigid and smelled of lemon polish and fear. I sat in the front row of the gallery, my posture perfect, my face at the mask of calm detachment. To my left sat the prosecutor, a sharp woman named Reynolds who had told me earlier that this was the easiest case she had prosecuted in years. The evidence I had provided was so overwhelming that a trial by jury would have been a massacre. So they had all taken plea deals admitting guilt in exchange for what they hoped would be leniency. My family sat at the defense table wearing orange jumpsuits provided by the detention center. The sight of them stripped of their designer clothes and their arrogance was jarring. Kyle looked like a skeleton having lost 10 pounds in 2 weeks of confinement. His hair, usually gelled to perfection, was greasy and flat. Ebony kept her head down, refusing to look at me or the judge. My parents, James and Beatrice, sat huddled together, looking small and frail, trying to play the sympathy card one last time. The bailiff called the court to order, and Judge Harrison walked in. He was an older man with a reputation for being tough on white-collar crime. He did not look at the defendants with pity. He looked at them with disdain. Adjusting his glasses as he opened the file in front of him, the proceedings began with Kyle. His public defender stood up, trying to paint a picture of a man under pressure, a man trying to provide for his family who made a terrible mistake out of love. Your Honor, the lawyer said, Kyle Anderson is a first-time offender. He is deeply remorseful. He asks the court for mercy. Judge Harrison looked over his glasses at Kyle. Mr. Anderson, you stole over $100,000. You committed wire fraud, identity theft, and you dragged your wife and in-laws into a criminal conspiracy. This was not a mistake. This was a calculated lifestyle choice. You wanted to live like a king on a pauper budget. The judge paused, letting the weight of his words settle. I sentence you to 60 months in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised release. You are also ordered to pay restitution in the amount of $124,000 to the victim, Sophia Jenkins. Kyle let out a sound like a wounded animal. He slumped forward, hitting his head on the table, sobbing uncontrollably. 5 years. His life as he knew it was over. There would be no golf, no country clubs, no luxury cars, just a 6x8 cell, and a lot of time to think about his arrogance. Ebony was next. She was shaking so hard her handcuffs rattled against the table. The judge looked at her with slightly more leniency, but not much. Ebony Anderson, you are sentenced to 5 years of probation. You avoided prison time only because you have minor children who need care. However, you are jointly liable for the restitution. You will get a job. You will contribute 50% of your wages to paying back your sister. You will attend mandatory financial literacy classes and perform 500 hours of community service. Ebony nodded, tears streaming down her face, whispering thank you, barely audible. Then it was my parents' turn. This was the moment I had been waiting for. The prosecutor had asked if I wanted to make a victim impact statement. My lawyer Davis had advised against it, saying I had already won, but I needed them to hear it. I needed to say it to their faces, in a room where they could not interrupt me. I stood up and walked to the podium. The microphone hummed slightly. I looked at my parents. My mother. Beatrice lifted her head, eyes wide, silently pleading with me. She mouthed the words, "Help us." She expected me to ask the judge for leniency. She thought that deep down, I was still the daughter who craved her approval. Your Honor. I began, my voice steady, echoing off the wood-paneled walls. For 10 years, I was not a daughter to these people. I was an investment vehicle. They did not love me. They liquidated me. They stole my past by gambling away my college fund. And they tried to steal my future by destroying my credit and my reputation. I took a breath, gripping the sides of the podium. The defense asks for mercy because we are family. But family does not steal your identity. Family does not leave you with an $18,000 dinner bill while they book a vacation with your money. If a stranger had done this, they would be in prison. I ask the court to treat them exactly as what they are, strangers who robbed me. I ask for the maximum penalty. Allowed by the plea agreement, I ask for justice, not for me, but for the little girl they exploited for decades. I stepped down and walked back to my seat. The silence in the room was suffocating. My mother looked at me with horror, realizing finally that the bridge was not just burned, it was nuked. Judge Harrison nodded, clearly respecting the statement. He turned his gaze to James and Beatrice. James and Beatrice Jenkins, stand up. My parents stood, their legs trembling. I find your actions despicable, the judge said, his voice booming. You preyed on your own child. You used her success as your personal piggy bank. And when she cut you off, you resorted to theft. You claimed to be elderly and unable to work, but you had plenty of energy to pack luxury luggage and fly to Hawaii. The judge picked up his gavel. I am sentencing you both to 5 years of strict probation. But probation is not enough. You stole from your daughter retirement to fund your lifestyle. Now you will pay it back. He leaned forward, his eyes locking onto my father. I am ordering the immediate garnishment of your Social Security benefits and your private pensions. The court is seizing these assets to pay restitution to Sophia Jenkins. You will live on the state minimum allowance until every single cent of that $100,000 is repaid. Furthermore, you are sentenced to 2,000 hours of community service. You will spend your golden years picking up trash on the side of the highway, wearing orange vests, so you can finally understand the value of honest labor. My mother let out a wail that curdled the blood. No, please, you cannot take our pension. How will we live? We will starve, the judge. They banged his gavel heavily, finalizing the decree. You will live within your means. Mrs. Jenkins, for the first time in your life, court is adjourned. The bailiff moved in to take Kyle away to begin his transfer to federal prison. He looked back at me, his eyes dead, hollow voids. He didn't scream this time. He just looked at me with the realization that he was nothing. My parents and Ebony were processed for release, but they were walking out into a world where they owned nothing. They had no home, no income, and a debt that would follow them to the grave. I walked out of the courtroom first, pushing through the heavy double doors into the bright hallway. Davis was waiting for me, a rare smile on his face. That was brutal, Sophia, he said, walking beside me. The pension garnishment was a masterstroke. They will never financially recover from that. It is fair, I said, adjusting my sunglasses. I supported them for 10 years. Now they can support themselves. Or rather, the state can support them while they pay me back. We walked out of the courthouse and into the Atlanta heat. The sun felt different today. It didn't feel oppressive, it felt cleansing. I stood on the steps watching the transport van drive away, taking Kyle to his new home. My phone buzzed. It was a notification from my bank. Restitution account opened. Pending deposit. I looked at the screen and swiped it away. I did not need the money. I never cared about the money. I cared about the lesson. And class was finally dismissed. I walked toward my car, ready to drive to the airport. Not for a trial, but for my own flight. My trip to Hawaii was booked for tomorrow, and unlike them, I was going to pay for it with my own money, and I was going to sleep like a baby the entire way there. The nightmare was over and the dream was just beginning. 6 months had passed since the gavel fell in that federal courtroom, and the silence that followed was the most expensive luxury I had ever acquired. The world kept spinning, but the axis of my life had shifted completely. Back in Atlanta, the humidity was likely clinging to the pavement, and the traffic was snarled on the connector. But I was 4,000 miles away, watching the sun dip below the Pacific horizon, painting the sky in shades of violet and burnt orange. I kept tabs on them for the first few weeks, mostly through the sterile reports provided by the probation officer assigned to their restitution case. It was a grim litany of consequences. My mother, Beatrice, a woman who once claimed she was allergic to polyester and manual labor, was now working the night shift as a custodial staff member at a local community college. The irony was poetic. The woman who refused to pay for my education was now cleaning the hallways of an institution dedicated to learning, scrubbing scuff marks off the linoleum floors to pay back the money she stole from me. The court had been strict. Her wages were garnished at the source, leaving her with just enough to pay the rent on a cramped one-bedroom apartment she shared with my father James, who spent his days picking up litter on the side of Highway 85, wearing a bright orange vest that matched the prison jumpsuit of his son-in-law Ebony, fared no better. The influencer lifestyle she had curated so carefully had evaporated like mist. The court-ordered financial literacy classes were mandatory, but the real education came from her new job at a discount grocery store. The girl who used to turn up her nose at anything that wasn't organic was now scanning coupons and bagging generic cereal for customers who yelled at her when the card reader malfunctioned. I heard from a mutual acquaintance that she had been spotted crying in the break room, hiding her face because she had run into a former sorority sister in the checkout line. The shame was a heavy coat, and she was wearing it every single day. I sat on the lanai of my suite at the Four Seasons Maui, looking out at the infinity pool blending into the ocean. This was the exact hotel they had tried to book. The exact view they had tried to steal. But the difference was that I was here with my own money, and my conscience was as clear as the water below. My phone, which lay on the table beside a bucket of chilled champagne, buzzed. It was a number I did not recognize, but the area code was familiar. It was a prepaid burner phone, the kind you buy at a gas station when your credit is too ruined to get a contract. Against my better judgment, I let it go to voicemail. I watched the screen darken, then light up again with the notification of a new message. I pressed play, putting the phone on speaker. Sophia. It was my mother, voice cracked and desperate, sounding older than her 60 years. Sophia. Please pick up. We are drowning here. Your father back is giving out. He cannot do the highway work anymore and the rent is late. Ebony kids need school clothes and she cannot make ends meet with the grocery store money. We just need a little help. Just this once, we learned our lesson. We are suffering. Please. Sophia. Just $500. We are family. I listened to the message, staring at the condensation dripping down the champagne bottle. There was no inquiry about my life, no apology for the crime, no question about how I was doing. It was just a demand wrapped in a sob, a transaction disguised as a plea. They hadn't changed. They were just broke. I felt a hand on my shoulder, warm and reassuring. I looked up to see Julian standing there, dressed in a crisp white linen shirt and holding two crystal flutes. Julian was a neurosurgeon I had met 3 months ago at a charity gala. He was brilliant, successful, and most importantly, he was kind. He knew my story. He had seen the court transcripts, and he didn't want my money. He wanted my time. Is that them? Julian asked softly, looking at the phone. I nodded. Yes. The final attempt. Julian sat down beside me, pouring the champagne, the bubbles rising aggressively in the glass. You know, you do not have to listen to that. You do not have to carry that noise. Anymore, I know. I said, picking up the phone. I looked at the number one last time. Then I opened my carrier app, I navigated to the settings menu and selected the option, Change Number. It was a permanent erasure. I selected a new area code, one that had nothing to do with Atlanta, and confirmed the change. The signal bars on my phone cycled off, then reconnected with a fresh, clean slate. The voicemail was gone. The number was gone. The bridge was not just burned, the ashes were swept away by the trade winds. I looked at Julian and smiled, a genuine smile that reached my eyes. It is done. They cannot reach me anymore. Julian clinked his glass against mine, looking at me with a respect that my family had never been capable of giving. To new beginnings, he said. I took a sip of the vintage champagne, tasting the notes of citrus and brioche. I looked out at the ocean, feeling the warm breeze against my skin, giving me goosebumps. It was not just a vacation, it was an exorcism. I had reclaimed the narrative of my life. I raised my glass again, looking at the horizon, where the sun was disappearing, leaving behind a twilight that felt full of promise. To independence, I said, my voice steady and strong. Happy Independence Day to me. We sat there in silence, watching the stars begin to emerge one by one. The air smelled of plumeria and salt water. Far away in a dingy apartment in Georgia, my mother was likely staring at a silent phone, waiting for a savior who was never coming back. But here in paradise, I was finally saving myself. I took Julian's hand, and we watched the night settle in. The past was a closed book, and for the first time in 32 years, I was the only author of the next chapter, and I intended to make it a masterpiece. The sale of the Mediterranean villa closed on a bright Tuesday morning, exactly 3 weeks after I returned from Hawaii. The real estate market in Atlanta was hungry for inventory, and a house with that much square footage, even one stripped of its soul, sold within days. The wire transfer hit my business account with a dull ping notification on my phone. $2.4 million. It was a staggering amount of money, enough to retire on, enough to travel the world, enough to buy a dozen Mercedes G-Wagons if I wanted to be as tacky as my brother-in-law. But looking at that number, I felt a strange sense of detachment. To my parents, that money represented status. It represented the ability to look down on others, to buy affection, and to cloak their insecurities in Italian silk. To me, it was just paper. It was the physical manifestation of the toxicity I had finally purged from my life. I sat in my office at Sterling and Vance, staring at the screen. My finger hovered over the transfer button. I knew exactly what I was going to do with it. I was not going to hoard it. Keeping it would feel like keeping a souvenir from a war. I wanted to forget, and I certainly was not going to give it to them to pay off their restitution debts. They could work that off at minimum wage for the next 300 years. I opened a new browser window and navigated to the incorporation portal. I had been working with my legal team on this for a week. The paperwork was ready. The mission statement was drafted. I typed in the name of the new nonprofit organization, the Phoenix Scholarship Fund. Its mission was simple but specific: to provide full-ride university scholarships to young adults who had been disowned, cut off, or financially abused by their families. It was a lifeline for the scapegoats, the black sheep, and the forgotten children who had to work 3 jobs just to buy textbooks while their siblings got brand new cars. I authorized the transfer, moving the entire $2.4 million into the foundation endowment. I watched the balance in my personal account drop back down and the balance in the charity account soar. I smiled. It was the most expensive check I had ever written, and it bought me something priceless: closure. The money that my family had destroyed themselves over was now going to ensure that 20 kids would never have to beg their parents for an education. It was the ultimate alchemy, turning their greed into someone else. Future. Just as I was closing my laptop, my personal cell phone rang. It was a number I did not recognize, but the caller ID displayed a location that made my heart skip a beat. Jessup, Federal Correctional Institution. It was a prison call. I debated letting it go to voicemail. But curiosity is a powerful force. I wanted to know. I wanted to hear the sound of reality setting in. So I swiped the green button and held the phone to my ear. There was a crackle of static, followed by a robotic female voice stating, "This is a prepaid call from a federal inmate. To accept charges, press 1." I pressed 1. Sophia came the voice. It was raspy, thin, and stripped of all its former bravado. It was Kyle. But not the Kyle who shouted at valet drivers or bragged about commission checks. This was a broken man, echoing from a concrete box. "Hello, Kyle," I said, my voice neutral, devoid of anger and devoid of warmth. "Sophia, thank God you picked up." Kyle said, his words rushing out in a panic. "Listen, I do not have much time on this call. They only give us 15 minutes. I need a favor, a small favor. I know you hate me. I know I messed up big time. But it is bad in here, Sophia. It is really bad." I leaned back in my leather chair, looking out at the Atlanta skyline. "What do you need, Kyle?" "I need commissary money," he pleaded, his voice cracking. "The food here is inedible. I am starving, and I need hygiene products, soap, toothpaste. They do not give you the good stuff. I just need a little cash on my books so I can buy some ramen and maybe a pair of shower shoes. Please, Sophia. Ebony cannot send me anything. She is broke. Your parents are broke. You are the only one I have left. Just $100. Please." I listened to him beg. The man who had called me a spinster, the man who had mocked my job, the man who had tried to steal $24,000 for a vacation he did not earn was now begging for soap money. It was pathetic. It was tragic. And it was exactly what he deserved. "I will do it, Kyle," I said. "You will." The relief in his voice was palpable. "Oh, thank you, Sophia. Thank you. I knew you were a good person. I knew you wouldn't let family suffer like this. You are a lifesaver." I pulled up the JPay website on my computer, the service used to send money to federal inmates. I searched for his inmate number. It popped up instantly, showing his mugshot. He looked terrified in the photo, a stark contrast to the smug selfies he used to take. I clicked on the Send Money tab. "I am on the site right now." "Kyle," I said, typing in my payment information. "You are the best." "Sophia." Seriously, Kyle was babbling now, almost crying with gratitude. "When I get out of here, I am going to make it up to you. I promise. I am going to pay you back every cent." "I know you will." "Kyle," I said softly. I navigated to the amount field. The cursor blinked, waiting for a number. Kyle was expecting $100, maybe even $200 if I was feeling generous. He was already mentally spending it, imagining the honey buns and the mackerel packets he would buy. I typed in the number 0.011 cent. I moved to the message field. There was a small box where you could type a note to the inmate limited to 50 characters. I typed slowly, savoring every keystroke. "Change from the dinner you stuck me with." I hit submit. The screen processed the transaction, confirming that one single penny had been deposited into the commissary account of inmate 48293, Kyle Anderson. "It is sent, Kyle," I said. "Thank you, Sophia. Really." I wait. "How much did you send?" "You will see it when it hits your account," I said, my finger hovering over the end call button. "It is exactly what you are worth." "Kyle?" I hung up the phone before he could scream. I could imagine the moment he checked his balance, the hope turning to confusion and then to crushing despair. It was not about the money, it was about the message. I was not his savior. I was not his bank. And I was certainly not his victim anymore. I stood up and walked over to the window. The sun was setting over the city, casting long shadows across the streets, where I used to feel so small, so used, and so unappreciated. The journey from that dinner table to this moment had been painful. It had cost me tears. It had cost me sleep. And it had forced me to confront the hardest truth of all. that sometimes the people who are supposed to love you the most are the ones holding the knife. But standing here now, free of their debt, free of their drama, and free of their expectations, I realized something profound. We are conditioned to believe that family is an unbreakable bond, a sacred contract that requires infinite forgiveness. We are told that blood is thicker than water and that walking away makes you a traitor. But that is a lie designed to keep victims in their place. True family is not defined by DNA. It is defined by respect. It is defined by reciprocity. It is defined by how safe you feel when you are around them. If your family makes you feel small, if they drain your resources and your spirit, if they only call you when they need something, then they are not family. They are an anchor, and you have every right to cut the rope. I thought about the scholarship fund I had just created. I thought about the kids who would get those letters of acceptance. Kids who had been told they were worthless, who had been kicked out for being who they are. They were my family now, the people I chose to support, the people who would use that support to build something beautiful, not to buy Louis Vuitton luggage. I picked up my purse and walked out of my office, turning off the lights behind me. I had a date with Julian tonight. We were going to a small Italian place. Nothing fancy, just good food and good conversation. There would be no yelling, no demands for money, and no one looking at my credit card with hungry eyes. As I walked to the elevator, I checked my phone one last time. There was a notification from the prison system. Transaction complete, 1 cent delivered. I smiled and put the phone away. I was not Sophia, the bank account anymore. I was not Sophia, the scapegoat. I was just Sophia. And for the first time in my life, that was more than enough. If you are listening to this and you feel trapped by obligation, if you feel like you are setting yourself on fire to keep others warm, remember this: you hold the hose, you can put the fire out, you can walk away, and you can build a life that is entirely, unequivocally yours. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember, the best revenge is not prison time. It is a life well lived without them. We are often told that blood is thicker than water, but I learned that respect is the only currency that matters in a relationship. You cannot buy love, and you cannot save people who see you only as a resource. Walking away from my family was not an act of betrayal. It was an act of survival. If you are setting yourself on fire to keep others warm, it is time to put down the match. You deserve a life defined by peace, not obligation. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe. Have you ever had to cut off a toxic family member? Tell me your story in the comments below.